Welcome back to Dreamland Encounters. My channel is all about sharing real-life experiences with extraordinary beings, helping you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we start, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment and let me know. The night was unusually still. Vermont evenings in early September have a special quality. The day's heat fades quickly, and the woods begin to cool down. Crickets chirped loudly, and the air carried the scent of freshly cut grass. From my porch, I could see the landscape transforming as twilight dissolved into darkness. My house sits on a slope overlooking a mixed landscape of forest and old pasture. I've lived here 3 years, familiar with every typical sound: trucks, shifting gears, foxes calling in the distance, neighbors' wind chimes. This particular evening felt different somehow. Wrapped in a blanket, I was relaxing in my rocker when something caught my eye. Behind the hill's crest, a peculiar white glow appeared. It wasn't like moonlight or headlights. This was a compact, steady point of light, perhaps half a mile away and low to the ground. As I watched, it began rising smoothly, almost confidently. Its movement was unlike anything mechanical. No bouncing, no wobbling, just a deliberate ascent through seemingly clear air. When the light fully crested the ridge, it was about the size of a softball at arm's length. Pure white, without any surrounding halo, suspended maybe 10 or 15 feet above the ground. An inexplicable feeling overcame me, a strong, almost instinctive urge to stand, as if remaining seated would be wrong. I set the tea down and pushed the blanket aside, standing up almost by instinct rather than conscious choice. Something felt different. The moment I moved, the glow shifted, not retreating or darting away, but pausing, briefly, as if acknowledging my movement before sliding smoothly down behind the ridge and vanishing completely. The tree line reclaimed the darkness, and the hill looked ordinary again. Early stars began to emerge overhead. I remained standing, staring at the spot where the light had just been, scanning the tree edges and waiting for its return. Nothing happened. My phone showed only a few minutes had passed, though it felt much longer, as if time had been subtly stretched in a way I couldn't explain. When I sat back down, the crickets resumed their song, tentative and sparse, testing the air carefully. I tried to relax, but my eyes kept drifting back to that ridge. The glow had been too deliberate, too controlled. Lights don't move like that without something guiding them. About 15 minutes later, I went inside to grab a jacket. Stepping back out, I noticed the air felt unnaturally cold, as if the temperature had dropped more quickly on my property than elsewhere. I pulled the jacket tight and studied the hill again. The clouds caught my attention. Thin, harmless streaks drifted east normally, except for one patch directly above where the light had appeared. There, they visibly slowed, moving as if passing through a different layer of air, thicker, warmer, somehow altered. Then they accelerated, rejoining the standard wind current. I walked down the steps into the damp yard, the grass's strong smell filling the air. Everything felt unnaturally still. The road below was completely empty. Without intending to, I called out, "Hello," into the darkness. My voice fell flat, quickly swallowed as if it couldn't travel beyond a certain point. Unnerved, I retreated up the steps. Around 9:30, Jacob's old car finally broke the silence, passing on the road below. The ridge sat there, motionless, in perfect silhouette, but something felt off. After the pickup truck disappeared, its tail lights fading into the distance, I felt a strange sense of being grounded. Even though I hadn't exchanged a word with the driver, I tried distracting myself inside. TV, sorting mail. Nothing worked. My eyes kept drifting back to the porch window, drawn inexplicably to the landscape outside. Something compelled me to watch, as if not seeing would mean missing something crucial. Around 10:15, I stepped outside. A slight chill had settled in, just enough to make my breath visible in the night air. Overhead, thicker clouds had gathered, darkening the sky. The crickets had fallen nearly silent, and only the wind rustling through distant birch trees broke the stillness. Then it happened again. This time the glow emerged differently, not above the ridge, but through it. A faint white radiance bled upward between two tall pines, brighter than before. It rose slowly, a thin shape slicing between tree trunks. But instead of continuing upward, it stopped midway, hesitated, and slipped back down. My heart pounded painfully. Backing toward the house, I kept my gaze locked on the ridge. One foot touched the porch step, The glow returned, this time moving slower, more deliberately. Again, it paused just before fully revealing itself, hovering for several seconds. Not directly visible, just a pale outline against the trees. But I could sense its presence. It wasn't a physical sensation, but that inexplicable feeling when someone's attention is focused on you before they speak. The air seemed to lean toward me. Almost instinctively, I raised my hand slightly, as if shielding my eyes from something bright. Then the glow slipped down one final time and vanished. I remained rooted, waiting long after it faded. My legs stiffened, my hands grew numb. The ridge looked ordinary again. Clouds drifted back to their usual patterns, and the crickets resumed their steady chirping. Inside, I didn't immediately lock the door. My mind kept replaying the glow's precise movement, how it rose, paused, and retreated with such controlled smoothness. It didn't feel random, it felt responsive, almost deliberate. Before bed, I checked the hill through the upstairs window. Nothing, just dark trees and empty landscape. I sat on the porch, my eyes drawn to the ridge as the evening settled in. Near dusk, I always find myself watching that distant line where land meets sky, waiting. Years ago, something happened that night that I can never quite forget. It was a late drive through New Mexico, that endless stretch of Highway 491, where desert sprawls wide and stars burn impossibly bright. Around 1 a.m., I was heading to my cousin's place, miles from any other car. The road stretched black before and behind me, illuminated only by my headlights and the countless stars overhead. I was half listening to a baseball discussion on the radio when everything changed. The signal cut to static, then went completely silent. Not just off, but quiet in a way that felt strange. The electronics hummed softly, but no sound came through. When I tapped the console, nothing happened. Something shifted in the air. Not temperature, but something deeper. The atmosphere felt heavier, pressing slightly against the car. The engine sounded normal, but the silence around me felt different. Layered, as if something massive was absorbing sound instead of reflecting it. Then the stars dimmed, not a gradual fade, but a smooth, coordinated wave moving from south to north. I gripped the wheel tighter, leaning forward. Later, back home, I would find myself drawn to my window. One evening, pulling the curtains closed, I caught a fleeting glimpse, a faint white reflection across the glass, too quick for a car, too high for anything in the yard. My chest tightened until I remembered to breathe. Now, whenever I sit on the porch, my eyes always drift to that ridge. I'm waiting, always waiting for a small, deliberate light to lift into view. Just for a moment it hovers long enough for me to rise before slipping silently back behind the hill, as if it had been watching me watch it. A darkness swept across the sky, blocking out the stars. I was driving, glancing straight ahead when I noticed something strange. At 70 miles per hour, I instinctively slowed down to around 50, sensing something was off. The air felt heavy, pressing against my ears. Stars began to vanish overhead, as if something massive was passing between me and the night sky. But there was no shape, no outline, just a gradual disappearance of light. I leaned forward, peering through the windshield, my heart racing. For 2 brief seconds, the sky directly above me went completely black. Absolute darkness, like someone had switched off space itself. Then, in an instant, every single star snapped back to full brightness simultaneously. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The pressure in my ears disappeared. Night sounds returned to normal, replacing the previous oppressive silence. The radio crackled back to life, mid-sentence. I sat frozen, staring upward, searching for an explanation. A plane? Impossible. Nothing that large could fly so low, and there were no lights. A cloud? The sky was crystal clear, without even a wisp. A chilling thought crept in. Whatever passed overhead hadn't just blocked the stars. It had absorbed them. The light hadn't dimmed or distorted. It had simply vanished. Gripping the steering wheel to steady my shaking hands, I forced myself to continue driving. I constantly checked the mirrors, seeing nothing behind me or outside the headlight's beam. 5 minutes later, the radio cut out again, going silent for a half second before resuming. I glanced at the dashboard clock. It flickered once, went blank, then returned to the exact same time. Something about this unsettled me more than the star phenomenon, the idea that something had manipulated the electronics in a way I couldn't comprehend. A pop in my ears, barely noticeable, like when your ears adjust to changing altitude. I scanned the sky, half expecting another wave of darkness to sweep through. Nothing looked different, but something felt off. The air seemed to be holding on to a memory. At the lone gas station along the road, the sign flickered twice as I approached, though from a distance the lights appeared normal. The moment I passed, they glowed steadily again. Completely empty road. About 20 minutes later, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, just faint dots on the horizon. When I looked again, they had vanished, not faded, not switched off, simply gone. A chill crawled up my spine. I pressed harder on the accelerator, desperately trying to push the thought of something circling back out of my mind. Arriving in Farmington, I immediately pulled into a brightly lit gas station. I didn't buy anything at first, just sat in the car with the engine off, listening. The radio worked fine. Everything felt normal. The sky's light pollution oddly comforted me. At least here, I couldn't watch the stars potentially dimming. Eventually, I went inside and grabbed a soda, wanting to do something mundane. The cashier commented on my pale appearance. I explained away my state as fatigue from a long, solitary desert drive. He chuckled about nighttime drives making people jumpy. I stayed silent. At my cousin's place, he was already asleep. I settled on the couch, still wired, repeatedly glancing through the partially closed blinds. My mind kept replaying that moment, how smoothly the stars vanished, how coordinated and impossible the darkness seemed. What haunted me most was their subsequent silence. Those few seconds where the world appeared to pause, waiting for the sky to resurrect itself. Weeks later, I still catch myself tensing during nighttime drives, not from stars flickering or hiding behind clouds, but from that perfect sweeping dimming, as if some massive, silent entity is momentarily blotting out the entire universe before letting it snap back into existence. I was jolted awake by something strange on my bedroom wall. Soft, rhythmic light pulses flickered at 3:20 a.m., an hour when nothing should be stirring. I checked the clock twice, convinced I might be dreaming, but the lights continued, steady, measured, casting thin white slits across my blinds. The neighborhood in Cedar Falls was unusually quiet and cold for early April. A thin fog hugged the ground as I approached the window. Something felt off. I lifted the blind slightly and saw something extraordinary. 8 street lights were blinking in perfect synchronization. This wasn't a random electrical glitch. These lights moved with mathematical precision. Exactly 1 second on, 1 second off, like a metronome. Each flash illuminated the misty street, revealing everything in a stark, momentary brightness before plunging it back into darkness. The houses around me seemed completely normal. Porch lights burned steadily, indoor lamps unchanged. Only these streetlights were performing their bizarre synchronized dance. Curiosity overcame my sleepiness. I pulled on sweats and a hoodie, deciding to investigate. What could cause such a precise light display? Perhaps a repair truck or some technical maintenance was happening. The moment I stepped onto the porch, something even stranger occurred. Every single streetlight instantly froze, mid-blink, locked into a steady, bright position. The abrupt stillness was unsettling. My ears felt like they popped, though no sound accompanied this bizarre transition. I walked to the curb, scanning the empty road. No cars, no distant mechanical hum. The fog continued rolling gently across the street, seemingly oblivious to the extraordinary light show that had just unfolded. The street was eerily silent. No cars, no engines, just the soft electric buzz of overhead lamps. I stood outside for a couple minutes, unsure what I was waiting for. When nothing seemed to happen, I started to turn back inside. That's when the nearest streetlight flickered, a single, almost imperceptible blink. The other lights remained steady. I stopped and looked closer. The bulb near my driveway buzzed softly, then fell quiet. My breath formed a misty cloud in the cold air. Again it flickered, twice this time, quick little pulses. Down the road, another light responded with its own blink. Something felt off. This wasn't random. It seemed like a conversation happening just beyond my understanding. Signals exchanged between lights that shouldn't communicate. I backed toward the porch, eyes locked on the street. 2 houses down, the 3rd street light blinked rapidly 3 times. Silence followed. Moments later, the light directly across from my house answered with one long blink. A cold dread settled in my chest. Streetlights don't do this. They don't blink in sequence, don't respond to unseen signals. As I reached the porch steps, all lights suddenly froze. Rock solid and unwavering, the fog thickened unnaturally at the street's end, making distant lights look hazy. Their beams seemed to bend. Then something shifted. The farthest light's beam moved slightly left, then snapped back as if something tall had briefly passed in front of it. More beams distorted. Transparent shadows glided through the fog, moving with impossible smoothness. I listened intently, hearing only electricity's faint hum and my racing heartbeat. The distant light flickered again, precisely spaced, deliberate, calculated. "Is someone there?" I whispered. Instantly, darkness swallowed the entire street. Every single street light extinguished. The neighborhood loop was my evening routine after work, a way to unwind and clear my head. Early October wrapped me in cool air, just crisp enough to see my breath, but not cold enough for gloves. Wet leaves and wood smoke drifted through the quiet suburb outside Asheville. The fog swallowed everything so quickly that the air seemed to thicken. My yard, driveway, and neighbor's house vanished completely. Even the fog disappeared into an impenetrable black. Blindly, I took a step up the porch and reached for the door. My fingers brushed the siding when suddenly the lights snapped back on. The sudden brightness made me flinch. Blinking against the glare, I turned toward the street. Nothing was there. The fog had thinned, settling low on the asphalt. No shadows, no movement, no indication anything had disturbed the lamp beams. Everything looked precisely as it always had. I went inside and locked the door, never taking my eyes off the street. My hands trembled so much that I dropped the latch twice before securing it. Sleep was impossible that night. Instead, I sat on the couch with the living room lamp on, blinds cracked open just enough to watch the streetlights. They remained steady throughout. Around 5:30 a.m., as the sky began to pale, I returned to the window. The fog had lifted, and my street looked like any typical morning. Then something happened that made my throat constrict. Just as the first sunlight touched the lamp tops, the streetlight farthest from my house blinked once, slow and deliberate. No other lights followed. I stood watching until full daylight erased the lamps completely. I checked for power outages, maintenance notices, anything that might explain the synchronized flickering. Nothing turned up. That night, and every night since, the street lights behaved normally. No flickers, no signals, no rhythmic pulses cutting through the blinds at 3 a.m. But sometimes, when I wake unexpectedly and the room is silent, I catch myself waiting for that soft strobe through the blinds, wondering if the streetlights are still out there, communicating in the fog, stopping the moment I step outside, watching in a way I can't comprehend. The quiet suburban neighborhood was a predictable maze of cul-de-sacs and gentle slopes. My walk started later than usual, around 10 p.m., driven by a restless energy that demanded movement. Streetlights were sparse, creating long stretches of darkness where my eyes strained to adjust. Most houses stood dark and silent, with only occasional blue television glows peeking through curtained windows. About half a mile into my walk, something caught my attention, a sound that seemed out of place. Initially, I mistook it for a transformer or an air conditioning unit struggling to shut off. But the sound wasn't coming from any ground-level source. It was above me, a metallic humming, smooth and precise, with an electronic quality that felt unnaturally clean. When I walked, the sound moved with me, detaching from any single point. I stopped walking. The sound stopped instantly. My breath hung in a small cloud as I listened intently. The night was completely still, no insects, no distant traffic, no barking dogs. Only a soft leaf rustle broke the silence. Then the humming resumed, gradual and mechanical. I scanned the street, checking for any signs of activity. All houses remained dark. Moving to the road center, I looked up, studying the sky. The clouds that night were thin and scattered. Most appeared as faint grey smears against the darkness. But directly overhead, one cloud section glowed softly, a diffused white light pulsing gently, as if illuminated from within by a hidden lantern. The humming intensified, not in volume but in presence. The air seemed to tighten around me. Squinting, I observed the glowing patch. It wasn't moonlight. The moon sat low and behind me. No aircraft I knew could produce such consistent, unbroken light through cloud cover. No navigation lights flickered. No additional sounds emerged beyond the steady hum. I stepped backward, changing my viewing angle. The glow remained unchanged, steady, and mysterious. The cloud hung motionless while everything around it drifted. I spoke out loud, saying hello, though I couldn't explain why. Instantly, the humming stopped. Darkness swallowed the cloud completely. My heart raced. I felt stupid talking to a cloud, but nothing about this moment felt normal. The silence was heavy, pregnant with anticipation. Standing in the middle of the street, I listened. 20, maybe 30 seconds ticked by. Then the glow returned, dim and cautious, testing the sky before fully revealing itself. The hum came back too, this time with a slow, pulsing rhythm reminiscent of a heartbeat. Gradually the glow intensified, brightening from within like something van-sized was illuminating the cloud from inside. Its edges curled slightly, as if heat was warping the moisture, except the air wasn't warm. It felt cold and razor-sharp. My arm and neck hairs stood on end. I stepped forward. No reaction from the glow. The hum remained steady. Another step. Suddenly, the cloud snapped to darkness, not fading, but switching off like a light. The hum cut out simultaneously. I froze, barely breathing. Absolute silence descended. No wind. No rustling leaves. The entire neighborhood seemed suspended in time. I slowly turned, scanning for any sign of movement or sound. Nothing. My shaky exhale broke the stillness as I walked faster, trying to rationalize the experience as atmospheric conditions or a distant spotlight. But logic felt wrong. The precision was too deliberate, the way the sound followed me, how the light appeared and vanished exactly with my movements. It all seemed intentional. A minute later, a soft, distant hum returned. I kept walking, ignoring it. The sound grew closer, drifting overhead. Curiosity won. I stopped and looked up. Ordinary dark clouds shifted harmlessly. Then, the same patch drifted back into view, carried by the wind. I was halfway through the loop trail behind Estes Park when it happened. The path cuts behind the ridge, offering those sweeping views of the valley below. Work had run long, and I didn't want to miss my hike entirely. By the time I was heading back, dusk had already settled in, the temperature dropping quickly as it does at elevation. Everything had that bluish tint you get right before full dark. The trail was completely empty. It was a Wednesday in early spring, and most people avoided this path unless it was full daylight. I'd only passed one other hiker on the way up. The sky above was filled with thin grey clouds that seemed to drift lazily across the darkening landscape. As one cloud passed directly overhead, something strange caught my attention. A faint outline appeared inside it, not quite a light, not exactly a shape, but more like a subtle distortion. The cloud seemed to bulge inward momentarily, as if something was pressing against it from behind. Then it slid past, evening out, as though nothing had happened. I stood rooted to the trail, frozen in place. The soft hum that accompanied the cloud gradually faded, becoming so faint I couldn't tell if it had truly disappeared or was just beyond my perception. Forcing myself to finish the loop, I kept glancing over my shoulder. Street lights made me feel exposed, while shadows made me feel watched. When I finally reached home, I went straight inside and locked the door. My hands were so cold, the key slipped twice as I turned it. Standing at the window, I scanned the street outside. Everything looked normal. A neighbor's porch light flickered on, a cat darted under a parked car, and the neighborhood settled back into its usual rhythm. Before bed, I stepped outside for one last look. The sky was darker now, clouds lower and thicker. No glow, no hum. But as I turned to go back inside, a single faint metallic ping caught my ear, like a cooling engine or a metal plate being tapped. The sound came from above the clouds, not loud but perfectly clear, then silence. I backed into the house, keeping my eyes on the sky until the door closed fully. I haven't heard that hum since that night, but now whenever thin clouds drift overhead during late walks, I find myself listening, waiting for that soft metallic sound to rise from the darkness, for the faint glow to pulse behind the clouds, just long enough to confirm something is there before vanishing like it never existed. The mountain trail had grown quiet as evening settled in. Earlier, I'd briefly chatted with a hiker named Mason about reaching the overlook before sundown. We'd split up at a trail fork, and I hadn't seen him since. Now, with the sun hidden behind the mountains, only a faint glow remained in the sky. Darkness crept into the forest around me. I switched on my headlamp. though the light wasn't strictly necessary yet. Something about the silence felt different, heavier than usual. At the overlook, I paused to drink water and adjust my knee sleeve. That's when I saw it, a bright point of light. At first glance, it looked like a star white with a soft bluish halo. The sky was dark enough for stars to emerge, but this was different. Too low, too bright, suspended impossibly between two distant mountain peaks. I watched, completely still. The light remained motionless, as if pinned to the sky. No flickering, no wavering, just pure, unmoving presence. When I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision, everything changed. The light moved, subtly, maybe 2 degrees to the right, but the motion was unnervingly smooth, not like a plane or drone, but a perfect fluid glide that seemed to defy physics. My stomach dropped watching its effortless horizontal drift. I lowered my water bottle, tracking its path between the peaks. After 5 seconds it slowed, then stopped, hovering again. Almost unconsciously I reached up to adjust my headlamp, needing to do something, anything other than stare directly at this inexplicable phenomenon. Then it began to fade, not suddenly but gradually. The bluish halo dimmed like a dying ember, pulsing softly one last time. It shrank, becoming fainter, until only a tiny dot remained, and then vanished completely. I waited for a plane, a satellite, something that might explain what I'd just witnessed, but the sky remained empty, silent, offering no answers. I glanced at my phone. 7:49 p.m. and no bars. Strange, since I usually got decent reception up here. The signal icon sat stubbornly empty. Something felt off. The forest had gone completely silent, an unnatural stillness hanging in the air. No wind rustled the trees, no birds called out, nothing. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen earlier, maybe a research drone, perhaps a distant reflection, but deep down I knew those explanations didn't ring true. Pushing those thoughts aside, I started back down the trail. 10 minutes into my descent, footsteps broke the silence. They were behind me, then suddenly to the right in the brush. Soft crunches on gravel, methodical and deliberate. Not like an animal, these steps had a calculated rhythm, as if someone was intentionally trying to remain unheard. "Mason," I called out. Silence answered. The steps continued their measured pace. One last soft crunch suggested something had stopped moving, perhaps watching. My pace quickened. The forest seemed to darken my headlamp beam, feeling inadequate, like something always remained just beyond its reach. Then the temperature shifted. A patch of trail, maybe 20 or 30 feet long, suddenly felt warm, impossibly so, given the steadily dropping mountain cold. Warm air pressed against my face, strongest on the trail's right side. I held out my hand. My headlamp revealed nothing unusual, just pines and underbrush. Then the warmth pulsed like a breath. I staggered back. The warmth vanished instantly, the cold rushing back. My heart raced. Halfway down the switchbacks, my headlamp flickered once before steadying. I slapped its side, moving faster. Something was out there, something watching. The night was cold and dry, typical of early November in rural Pennsylvania. Around 11 p.m., I was driving home from my sister's place, taking the longer back route due to highway construction. The road stretched empty before me, with woods pressing close on both sides and cracked asphalt barely illuminated by my headlights. I wasn't particularly tired, but my mind wandered as I drove. The radio played softly, more for companionship than anything else. Reflector posts flashed white in my peripheral vision, appearing and disappearing in quick succession. The car's heater fogged the window's edges, creating a cocoon of warmth. About 5 miles from the turn toward town, something unusual caught my attention. A reflection hung suspended above the pavement, about 5 or 6 feet high. It wasn't bright or glowing, but reflected my headlights with an eerie, perfectly contained precision. The headlights revealed a small spherical glint that didn't match any road sign or marker. Suddenly, the light flickered, plunging me into unexpected darkness. The abrupt shift sent an inexplicable jolt through me. Minutes later, my phone's reception returned, showing 3 bars. The forest around me slowly came back to life. First a distant owl call, then wind rustling through leaves. By the time I reached the trailhead, my heart was racing unreasonably fast. The parking lot stood empty except for my car, and the overhead lamp buzzed normally. Before getting in, I glanced back toward the mountain peaks. Where the light had hovered, nothing remained. But then something caught my eye. A faint white point far to the right. Not bright, not moving, just hanging above an unnamed ridge. I blinked, and it vanished. I stood frozen, unsure whether I wanted it to reappear or stay gone. Eventually I drove home, constantly checking the rearview mirror. I half expected to see a floating pinpoint drifting behind me with impossible smoothness. Instead, I saw only dark mountain silhouettes and the fading colors of dusk, nothing more. Something hung in the road ahead, a round, reflective object just suspended there. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. Not a balloon, which would drift, and definitely not a windshield fragment. The reflection was too perfect, too steady. My body sensed something was wrong before my mind could process what I was seeing. My speed dropped instinctively, from 45 to around 25. The object remained completely motionless, defying normal physics. My headlights should have illuminated the surrounding area, trees, asphalt, anything, but only this single reflection caught the light. The space around it stayed unnaturally dark, like an invisible barrier blocked all other illumination. Rolling down the window revealed absolute silence. No wind, no crickets. Just my engine's hum and tires softly crunching against the road. I inched forward, expecting the object to break apart or reveal some mundane explanation. Instead, it rose, not drifting or angling, but lifting with impossible smoothness, as if guided by an unseen track directly into the sky. The reflection remained perfectly round, shrinking slightly as it moved away from my headlights. Nothing around it became visible, not overhead branches, not the surrounding air. My lights bounced off cleanly, but without spreading or spilling. It felt like the reflection belonged to something that absorbed everything else. I stopped completely. The object continued rising steadily until it reached treetop height. Then, abruptly, it vanished. Not fading, not shooting away, simply blinking out of existence like someone flipped a switch. My headlights now illuminated only empty road. Gripping the steering wheel, pulse racing, I waited. Would it reappear above me? Down the road? Anywhere? But the sky remained pitch black. No stars through the cloud cover. No distant airplane lights. Just darkness. I switched off the radio, straining to listen. Nothing. Nothing. Complete, absolute silence. The woods pressed in closer, heavier than before. I froze, trying to process what I'd just seen. My mind raced to find a logical explanation, maybe a drone, something experimental with a reflective surface. But drones don't move like this. They wobble. They're noisy. They have blinking lights. This was different. Silent, impossibly smooth. Rising straight up with no acceleration. Something that made my stomach clench. I forced myself to keep driving. About a quarter mile down the road, my headlights flickered just once. A quick pulse of dimming and brightening. I sat up straighter, watching the beams ahead. Another dim, then back to normal. I tapped at the dashboard uselessly. The dimming stopped. Then the radio crackled to life with static, unprompted. I hadn't turned it on. As I reached for the knob, the static cut out, leaving silence. The woods around me felt unnaturally quiet, as if sound had been sucked away. I pressed the accelerator. At the fork leading back to town, I relaxed slightly. Only 10 minutes from streetlights and civilization. But the darkness felt different, thicker somehow. In the rearview mirror, a faint flash caught my eye, like a reflective surface catching the last hint of my taillights, far down the road, too distant to measure, too small to identify. I stared, waiting. Nothing. The mirror showed only darkness. No headlights. No shapes. No movement. Yet the feeling persisted. I kept checking, my hands gripping the wheel tighter. Rounding the last curve before the first houses, my headlights flickered twice. A faint electronic buzz ran through the dashboard. Then everything normalized. The woods ended. Houses appeared. The road lit up normally. The silence lifted. I could hear my tires, the heater fan. The atmosphere shifted back to what it should be. By the time I pulled into my driveway, normality almost convinced me I'd imagined it all. The residential street was quiet, empty. I sat in my parked car with the engine running, not expecting to see anything. Just before switching off the headlights, a faint flash caught my eye at the road's far end. A tiny spherical reflection, too quick and distant to definitively identify. Later that night, I couldn't stop replaying that moment. The reflection had moved with an unnatural precision, its light bouncing cleanly without illuminating anything else around it. I tried rationalizing it, listing every possible mundane explanation, but nothing felt right. Now, whenever my headlights strike something reflective in the darkness, road markers, trash cans, even a dog walker, I momentarily freeze, my eyes scan carefully, checking whether the reflection sits exactly where it should, or if it's hovering slightly above the ground, preparing to rise silently into the night. At 2 a.m, I woke to a barely perceptible sound. My water glass trembled, the vibration resembling what might occur from a passing truck or heating system. But this was different. A low, steady hum passed through the floor and wall behind my bed. My home sits on Boone, North Carolina's quiet outskirts, where nighttime sounds typically consist of owl calls or an occasional mountain-bound vehicle. This noise, however, was unnervingly consistent, like a distant generator running underneath the floorboards. I sat up, listening intently. The house remained silent. Then I felt it again. A gentle, almost imperceptible vibration causing my bed frame to faintly tremble. Placing my hand against the wall, I felt a soft buzz confirming I wasn't imagining things. After swinging my legs out of bed, I stood barefoot, listening. The vibration continued for perhaps 5 seconds before vanishing completely. No residual hum, no settling creaks, just absolute stillness, as if something had smoothly passed through and moved on. Walking to the window, I pulled back the curtain. The sky looked subtly different, not bright, but transformed. A soft glow seemed to have momentarily bled through the clouds, leaving an inexplicable impression of something extraordinary. Here's the rewritten text. Harper lifted her head as I moved downstairs, her ears alert but not fearful. The dog crate was quiet, and she watched me without making a sound. Something felt different in the house. Earlier, I'd let her out and noticed the sky, strange for this time of night. No moon was visible, but an odd pale tint hung overhead, too bright for the hour. The illumination vanished quickly, like a dimmed light behind thick fabric. Outside, the yard looked ordinary. Gravel driveway, pine trees at the property line, shed standing where it always had. Nothing seemed out of place. But silence felt heavy, almost oppressive, the kind that makes you feel suddenly watched. Curiosity pushed me forward. I slipped on shoes and stepped into the yard, immediately sensing something unusual in the atmosphere. Not temperature change, but a different kind of weight, like the air before a thunderstorm. Except no storm clouds gathered. Low, motionless clouds hung overhead. No wind stirred the trees. When I reached the yard center, a subtle vibration emerged beneath my feet. A soft, uniform thrum spread through the ground, reminiscent of a distant underground engine or something massive passing silently above. The sky lightened again, a dull silver glow filtering through clouds. I stared intently, searching for any explanation. The glow pulsed slowly, almost like a gentle breath beneath the cloud cover. It made the clouds ripple in an unnatural way, suggesting something large enough to shift the atmosphere without creating sound. Then everything stopped. The glow dissolved, darkness returned, and the vibrations ceased. A deeper silence settled around me. I stood frozen, trying to understand what I'd just experienced. I stood frozen in the yard, unsure whether to retreat inside or remain watchful. The open space around me felt vulnerable. Harper wasn't with me, and calling out seemed too dangerous. A faint white glimmer caught my eye, flashing briefly behind the trees at my property's edge, like a metallic reflection from phantom headlights. But no roads existed back there, only dense woodland stretching for acres. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet, no rustling, no owl calls. My head throbbed from intense listening. The initial flash didn't repeat, and the trees remained motionless. Cautiously, I backed onto the porch and slipped inside without a sound. Harper was alert, ears forward, staring intently at the window. She wasn't growling, just intensely focused. For half a minute, I watched her, wondering if she'd relax. She didn't. Her gaze remained fixed until a soft vibration returned, barely enough to make the mug rack jingle. The sky began brightening through the curtains. Against my better judgment, I looked. Another pale glow rippled beneath the clouds, suggesting something massive moving at an impossible height. This time, the light stretched wide, almost the full length of my backyard. diffuse, and even it lasted 4 or 5 seconds. Long enough for my breathing to quicken, long enough for Harper to release a confused whine. Then darkness returned. The vibration stopped. Everything went still. I pulled the curtains closed and pressed my back against the wall, waiting. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. 5 minutes passed without incident. Harper eventually circled and lay down, though her head remained raised, eyes open. Upstairs, I sat on my bed's edge, staring at the wall that had been vibrating earlier. My palm against its surface revealed nothing. The house felt normal. The sky outside had gone completely dark. I tried rationalizing the experience. A distant plane, atmospheric anomaly, or strange seismic event. But deep down, I knew nothing truly explained what I'd just witnessed. I'd been driving through Kansas since early morning west towards Colorado to visit my brother. One of those endless drives where the landscape barely shifts for hours. By the time I reached the rest stop outside Oakley, the sun was setting and my back had practically welded to the driver's seat. The rest stop was nearly empty. 8 or 9 cars scattered around, a couple of semi-trucks idling in their section, and a deserted picnic area where the temperature had dropped unexpectedly. The sky glowed deep orange, softening into blue. That particular dusk where everything looks muted and gentle. Not a breath of wind stirred, not even the grass near the dumpsters. I parked at the lot's far edge and stepped out. My car door closed with a sharp, metallic ping that seemed startlingly loud in the absolute stillness. I half expected someone from an RV to peek out, curious about the noise. Walking a few laps, checking maps, sipping water, I eventually sat on the curb facing my car and the surrounding vehicles. That's when something odd happened. My car rocked slightly, a small, inexplicable shift, as if someone had leaned against it, or a gust had pushed it. But there was no wind. I would have felt it on my skin or seen it moving the grass. The air remained completely motionless. Later, after that night, strange things lingered. Whenever clouds settled low over the mountains or the house grew too quiet, I'd find myself listening, waiting, hoping to catch that faint vibration again, soft enough to make me question its reality, just before an impossible light might brighten the sky. I checked everywhere for explanations, news reports about tremors, outages, meteor sightings. Nothing. The next morning, everything looked ordinary. Harper acted normal. The sky was overcast, pine scents hanging in the damp air, but around noon while making coffee, I heard it again. A single brief tremor through the wall. I froze, waiting for the sky to change. It didn't. The vibration didn't return. Just that one moment. Small, quiet, almost like a reminder. None of those explanations matched how the light moved, as if something was breathing underneath the clouds, not above them. I didn't sleep that night. I stood up, scanning the parking lot around me. Something felt off. The blue sedan next to my car was swaying gently, moving forward and back in an odd rhythm. I walked closer, checking other vehicles. A silver minivan down the road tilted slightly, its roof rack creaking softly. No wind stirred the nearby trees or flags. My hair remained perfectly still. Every parked vehicle seemed to be moving in synchronized motion, like a subtle, invisible force was nudging them. The semis in the distance shifted silently, their trailers tilting imperceptibly. Despite the strange movement, no one else appeared concerned. A guy leaving the bathroom stayed focused on his phone. A woman climbing into her pickup truck seemed oblivious to the unusual motion. I crouched down, placing my hand on the pavement. It felt normal, just cracked concrete, not vibrating or warm. The air seemed heavier, laden with an unexplainable tension. Something about the atmosphere felt different, charged with an unseen pressure beneath the silence. Above the rest stop, about 100 feet up, a faint glow caught my attention. It flickered a soft white, almost bluish light that vanished quickly. I thought it might be a plane's reflection, but the sky was dark and no aircraft were visible. The light appeared directly over the parking lot, pulsing silently without illuminating anything around it. The cars rocked harder momentarily, not violently, but deliberately, as if responding to the mysterious flicker. A low, indescribable pressure hummed in my ears, not quite a sound, but a shifting sensation too subtle to define. The glow pulsed once more, softer, and then disappeared completely. Instantly, every vehicle froze, returning to absolute stillness. The silence returned to normal. I stood in the middle of the lot, feeling strangely exposed, glancing around to see if anyone else had reacted. But no one seemed fazed. The guy with the phone casually got into his SUV and backed out. The woman in the pickup turned on her headlights as if nothing was out of the ordinary. A trucker climbed into his cab, humming loudly across the lot. I walked back to my car with slow, cautious steps, half expecting it to move again. But it didn't. The frame was still, tires resting normally against the pavement. I pushed the side mirror gently, feeling its normal resistance. Something caught my eye as I circled to the driver's door. A fine layer of chalky dust covered the roof and windshield, as if I'd driven through a construction site or gravel storm. But I'd been on the interstate for hours, with no dirt roads or recent storms to explain this thin grey coating. I wiped some off with my finger, leaving a smear that didn't feel gritty, more like powder. I sniffed it, no smell. Checking the nearby cars, I saw the same dust on their roofs, light enough to vanish when blown. My phone buzzed, no service, not a single bar. Earlier, I'd had full coverage on the interstate, and the rest stop should have been no different. I tried toggling airplane mode. Nothing. Instinctively, I locked the doors and climbed into the car, breathing carefully. My headlights illuminated the empty parking space ahead. The lot looked peaceful again. The glow above the rest stop felt like a hallucination, except the dust and the memory of the rocking wouldn't let me dismiss it. I started the engine. The dashboard lights flickered briefly before stabilizing. The radio produced a short burst of static, even though it was turned off. I hit the button to turn it on, then off again. The static stopped. My hands shook as I pulled out of the lot. As soon as I hit the highway, my phone buzzed again. Full service. Notifications poured in like nothing had happened. For the first 10 miles, I repeatedly checked the rearview mirror, watching the sky over the rest stop. I was driving home to my cabin near the river outside Tillamook late at night, taking back roads to avoid the tourist-packed highway. Dense fog had rolled in from the coast, creating a thick, wet blanket that swallowed sound and made trees appear twice their normal size. My wipers swept lazily across the windshield, brushing away mist more than rain. I knew this route well, a winding path through forest patches and open fields, but something felt different this time. The usual nighttime sounds were absent. No frogs, no distant ocean wind, no hint of a passing truck on 101, just the soft hum of my engine and the steady click of wipers. As I rounded a bend where the forest rose sharply on both sides, forming dark walls of trees, something caught my eye. A cluster of lights appeared above the tree line. Initially, I assumed it was a low-flying plane, but these lights moved too slowly, too smoothly, and hung too close. 5 or 6 soft white-yellow dots arranged loosely in a curve, neither twinkling nor particularly bright. In the rearview mirror, the lights seemed to shrink behind me. A faint flicker on the distant horizon caught my attention, a split-second flash. Was it lightning? A reflection? My imagination playing tricks? I drove the rest of the way to my motel in silence, constantly checking my mirrors. That night I noticed a chalky dust coating my car's roof under the yellow parking lot lights. Its texture felt oddly weightless. Sleep came fitfully with strange sensations of the room swaying and mysterious glows seeping through the blinds. Morning revealed the dust had mostly washed away with the dew, leaving only a few windshield smudges. The car looked normal again, but something had changed in me. Now, whenever I pass rest stops, even unfamiliar ones, I find myself watching parked cars, sensing the air's weight, scrutinizing the sky for any inexplicable brightness. And sometimes, just for a moment, I catch a flicker above the rooftops before it vanishes. The fog hung thick around me, muffling everything. Midnight, and I was driving slowly through coastal woods when something caught my eye. Lights glowed through the mist, unlike anything I'd ever seen above these trees. Not sharp, but soft, like lanterns behind frosted glass. They moved with an uncanny grace, not rigid or perfectly aligned, but drifting together the way small fish swim in a school. About 30 feet above the treetops they floated without a sound. No engine hum, no breeze, just a steady, deliberate movement. I rolled down the window halfway. The silence was profound. Even the usual moisture dripping from branches seemed to have vanished. cold air hit my face in tiny pinpricks but carried no noise. The lights shifted subtly, turning or rotating, I couldn't quite tell. Fog blurred their edges, transforming sharp points into soft orbs. As they passed over the road ahead, moving toward the forest's far side, I realized I'd stopped the car. My headlights created a tunnel effect in the mist, but these lights cut through differently, almost as if the fog bent around them instead of obscuring them. Leaning forward, I gripped the steering wheel tighter as the lights descended slightly. They hovered, swaying almost imperceptibly. An odd sensation washed over me, like someone was watching standing silently behind me. A pressure, an awareness. Then a light breeze from the west began thinning the fog. My headlights stretched farther. I blinked, clearing moisture from my eyes. When I looked up again, they were gone. The tree line was dark, empty. Fog drifted normally across the branches. Nothing moved above them. I rolled the window down completely, listening. Nothing. The silence felt heavier now, weighted with something unexplained. The forest hung silent and thick with fog. My boots crunched on gravel as I stepped out of the car, breath forming shaky clouds in the cold air. At the road's edge, the ditch stretched before me, and the smell of damp earth felt sharp and almost metallic. Black trees loomed on both sides, impenetrable and pressing close. Suddenly, a snap broke the silence, a twig or branch deep in the woods to my right. I froze. The sound echoed unnaturally clean through the mist, as if the forest had been holding its breath. I strained to hear more, but nothing followed. No rustling, no movement, just an unnatural stillness. A soft vibration hummed through the air, faint like distant machinery, except no machinery existed here. It lasted barely 2 seconds before fading. Instinctively, I backed toward the car, eyes locked on the tree line. The fog thickened as the breeze died, the atmosphere closing in around me. Inside the vehicle, I locked the doors, knowing the gesture was futile against whatever presence I'd sensed. I killed the headlights briefly, hoping darkness might reveal something. Nothing emerged, just black trees and shifting fog. When I switched the lights back on, a white flash caught my rear-view mirror. I spun around but saw only fog and faint tree silhouettes. Something compelled me to drive. Not logic, but pure instinct. The fog swallowed the road ahead, but I maintained a careful speed. My fingers felt numb on the steering wheel. For a mile, the forest remained unnaturally quiet. No frogs, no owls, no rustling, just my tires on damp pavement. Just before reaching my driveway, the woods behind me glowed softly. Not a bright flash, but a gentle light filtering through fog, as if something drifted beyond the trees. I didn't stop. I pulled in, rushed inside, and double-checked every lock, knowing how illogical I was being. That night by Lake Mod, everything felt different. It was early June, warm but not sticky, with a thin layer of fog blurring the horizon. Most nights I'd be out fishing after work, unable to sleep until late. The lake was nearly empty, just a distant pontoon near Governor's Island, a nearby kayak, and me sitting on the old wooden dock behind the park. Around 11:40 p.m., I was retying a fishing knot when something caught my eye. A thin, perfectly straight white line was sliding across the lake's surface. At first, I thought it might be a car's reflection, but something was off. Previous car reflections had always been broken and jittery. This was different, clean and sharp. The light moved in a slow, steady sweep, cutting across the faint fog. It looked like someone had drawn a precise white line on the water, maybe 30 or 40 feet long. From my perspective, it seemed to be coming from a high-angle spotlight. But when I looked up, the sky was empty, just a dark, hazy expanse with scattered stars. No planes, no drones. I stood up, watching the horizontal line continue its smooth trajectory. When it reached a patch of reeds near the shore, it passed cleanly over them, as if the reeds weren't even there. Later that night, when I finally looked out the window toward the tree line, the fog had mostly lifted. The forest looked normal again, peaceful, untouched. But an unsettling quiet lingered until sunrise, too deep, too whole, as if the woods hadn't yet decided it was safe to make noise. Even now, whenever fog rolls in from the coast and settles low over the trees, I catch myself watching, looking for those soft, drifting lights to reappear. Not bright enough to truly scare me, but strange enough to make me wonder if they were ever meant to be seen at all. Everything was silent. No sound emerged from the water or trees. and even the insects had fallen quiet. I scanned the surroundings, searching for any sign of life. Someone on the dock, a distant shore, or a boat with a floodlight. Nothing. The pontoon I'd noticed earlier had disappeared, and the kayak had slipped away unnoticed. I was completely alone. A line of light hung motionless on the water's surface, about 20 yards out. Tiny ripples distorted the lake around it, yet the light remained unnaturally straight. Something that defied logic. Light shouldn't behave like this when water moves beneath it. I inched closer to the dock's edge, and the light responded instantly. It contracted, becoming shorter but intensely brighter. The change was subtle, yet I felt something more than saw it, like a sudden focused attention. Stillness engulfed everything. The lake seemed suspended, frozen in time. Fog drifted around the area, carefully avoiding the line of light. Then, slowly and deliberately, the light expanded again. It moved smoothly, as if searching, sliding across the dock's length until it reached the far end and paused. Water lapped softly against the wood, its sound strangely muted. My fishing line, previously motionless, began vibrating gently. This tremor wasn't caused by fish or wind, but traveled steadily up the rod and into my hand. I quickly reeled in, unwilling to let anything touch the water near that mysterious light. The vibrating stopped when the line cleared the surface. But the moment I set the rod down, the light contracted again, brightening. It wasn't responding to sound or water movement. It was reacting to me. Heart pounding, I retreated to the dock's midpoint. The planks creaked beneath my weight, the sound echoing strangely across the lake. Fog seemed to muffle the noise unevenly. The light expanded once more, stretching wide before fading to a barely visible outline. I held my breath as the light sharpened again, more intense than before. Then, without warning, it vanished. Gone in an instant. The night had been strange from the start. I was on the dock, my lantern casting a faint glow where the wooden planks met the dark water. One moment, a line of light slid across the surface. The next, everything went pitch black. Something felt off. The silence was heavy, expectant. I waited, scanning the sky for any sign of planes or search beams. Nothing moved. Just a still, clouded night, unchanged by my presence. Holding the lantern over the water, I half expected to see something lurking just beneath the surface. The lake remained black and calm. Then, a small splash broke the silence. It wasn't natural, too precise, like something had been deliberately dropped into the water. I swung the lantern toward the sound, catching only fog and ripples. More splashes followed, one behind me, another farther out. They weren't rapid or chaotic, just deliberate drops falling from nowhere. Frozen in place, I gripped the lantern tightly. The splashes continued for about 15 seconds before stopping abruptly. The forest seemed to inhale, then go silent again. Packing up felt wrong. Every sound I made seemed amplified, too loud, too sharp. The metal tackle box clasp clicked like a gunshot. As I prepared to leave the dock, I glanced back. For less than a blink, a faint line of light flickered across the water ghost-like, then vanished completely. I nearly ran to my car, feeling like the world lagged slightly behind me. Fog thickened near the tree line, swallowing picnic tables and trash bins. In the gravel lot, my headlights caught a brief, sharp gleam on the water before it faded. The drive home was silent. I kept checking the rearview mirror, knowing I'd see nothing through the fog. When I finally reached home, the living room's silence felt eerily familiar, as if the lake's quiet had followed me. Stubborn curiosity drove me back to the dock the next morning. Everything looked normal. Kids were fishing. Boats dotted the water. Nothing hinted at the previous night's strange encounter. The night was cool, hovering between summer and autumn. It was early October, and I was taking out the trash later than usual after a long phone call with my sister. My house sits near the edge of a quiet neighborhood in Ashford, Connecticut, surrounded by trees with minimal light pollution. As I stepped outside, damp leaves scattered across the yard, their earthy smell drifting around me. I wasn't paying much attention, just wondering if raccoons had gotten into the trash bags again. Halfway to the bins near the maple trees, something strange caught my eye above the roofline. A patch of sky looked odd, not darker or brighter, but slightly blurred. It reminded me of heat distortion, except this was high among the stars on a cool night. I thought maybe my glasses were smudged, so I took them off and wiped them. The distortion remained, a soft, wavering oval-shaped, drifting across the starry background. The stars behind this patch looked warped, slightly stretched as if seen through moving water. It moved steadily from west to east, about the speed of a silent, nearly invisible small plane. I waited for a jet silhouette or wing light, but nothing appeared, just this transparent, shimmering distortion that bent the background around it. Suddenly, the trash bag in my hand rustled, though I wasn't moving. A small breeze brushed past me, but the surrounding trees stayed perfectly still. The fog was gone, and the water nearby showed nothing unusual, no light, no splashes, no oppressive silence. For a brief moment, when the sun had hit the water's surface earlier, I thought I'd seen a thin white line gliding toward the reeds, but it vanished before I could be certain I hadn't imagined it. The yard hung silent around me, broken only by the soft thump near the shed. Something was different. The leaves in a small patch rustled, as if caught in an invisible swirl, but no wind stirred the rest of the ground. It felt empty, not dangerous, just altered, like something had passed through and left the space unsettled. Earlier, I'd watched a strange distortion drift across the starry sky. It moved differently, almost deliberately, not physically rotating, but twisting in a way I couldn't quite describe. Stars bent and rippled behind it as the patch grew more defined, its edges tightening like it was concentrating. My bag shifted slightly, as if the air's pressure had changed for a moment. I stepped back toward the porch, my stomach tight. The distortion paused, not completely stopping, but slowing to almost nothing. Stars continued drifting normally behind it, then it resumed moving eastward, growing fainter and stretching thin. By the time it dissolved into the starfield, it looked like nothing more than summer heat rising from a roof. Maybe it was a temperature inversion, I thought. My eyes were tired from staring at a screen for hours. But that spot by the shed, the rustling leaves, something wasn't right. I dropped the trash bag in the bin and headed back inside. Through the sliding glass door, the stars where the distortion had traveled looked different. Brighter, sharper, as if the air had been scrubbed clean. My phone buzzed a compass calibration notification. Something felt off, but I couldn't explain what. The night was quiet when I pulled into the abandoned Ridgeway Outlet Mall lot. This had become my sanctuary during long drives, a place with zero people, zero noise, just occasional car lights from Run 6 in the distance. It was late, around 10:30 p.m. days earlier. Something strange had started happening. My compass had behaved oddly, its calibration animations spinning longer than usual, before finally settling. I chose not to mention this weird experience to my sister during our call, feeling it would sound too bizarre if spoken aloud. Around 2 a.m. that night I awoke to a soft, persistent tapping on my window. Not aggressive, just a light, irregular rhythm like something gently brushing against glass. Heart racing, I listened intently. When I finally pulled back the curtain, nothing seemed amiss. Just my reflection, a dark yard, and starlight casting faint outlines everywhere. But something was off. A patch of sky to the east looked slightly blurred, almost translucent. A soft ripple passed across it, vanishing the moment I blinked. The tapping stopped simultaneously. The house felt unnervingly silent, as if the air itself was listening. Morning brought normalcy back. Birds chirped loudly, warmth filled the air, and my yard looked perfectly ordinary. Yet my phone's compass requested recalibration again. That evening, while taking out the trash, I found myself instinctively scanning the sky. For a long moment, everything appeared normal. Then, unexpectedly, a single star in the eastern sky flickered, not twinkled, but distinctly flickered and slid sideways by a mere inch before settling back. So subtle, I could have easily dismissed it as a trick of my eyes. I didn't linger outside to investigate further. The lot stretched out around me, cracked asphalt peppered with weeds pushing through the pavement. Behind me, a dark, hollow building sat silently. My car engine was off, and I was leaning back in my seat, parked near the middle of this quiet space. The early autumn night was cool and dry, with sound traveling in strange, crisp ways. Even the highway's hum seemed too sharp. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. The compass app was open, though I hadn't touched it in weeks. At first, nothing seemed unusual. But then I noticed the compass needle spinning, not drifting or flickering, but rotating smoothly, a full rotation every second. This wasn't normal. I'd had this phone for years, and it had never done this before. I tried tilting the phone, closing and reopening the app. The needle kept spinning. When I switched to the map app, the blue location dot jumped erratically half a mile north, then off the road entirely, then back near my actual location, pulsing as if unable to settle. The compass needle spun faster. A tightening in my chest felt like random anxiety, the kind that hits when you're alone at night in a place that's just quiet enough to feel wrong. I stepped out of the car, partly hoping to calm the magnetometer by moving away from the metal frame, but the spinning didn't stop. The lot seemed larger now that I was standing. The abandoned building's dark presence felt like it was leaning in, closing the space around me. The sky above was clear, no storms, no clouds, just an empty, moonless stretch of stars. The silence grew heavier. I held the phone out, turning slowly to see if the compass would respond to my movement. It didn't. The needle continued, its steady, clock-like loop. Then suddenly a light appeared, a faint, white, thin flash that cut across the sky in a perfectly straight line, unlike any meteor trail I'd seen before. The compass needle suddenly froze, pointing southeast as I stood there, scanning the sky after witnessing a clean streak of light that lasted less than half a second. This wasn't like a satellite drifting overhead. It was moving too fast and sharply. The sky looked normal again, almost suspiciously so. My car's headlights flickered with a quick, barely noticeable blink. Inside, the dome light glowed faintly and faded quickly, as if draining from a dying battery, though I knew mine was new from that summer. When I tried unlocking the car, the fob didn't respond immediately. The second press worked, but the beep sounded muted, like something had dampened the sound. Climbing back inside, I noticed the air felt warmer than outside, despite everything being turned off. It was 10:43 p.m., and I'd only been out for a minute or two. The compass needle started spinning again, this time slower but steady. Holding my phone against the windshield, I realized the spinning seemed synchronized with a hum I'd earlier mistaken for distant highway noise, except now it sounded uncomfortably close, reverberating inside the car. Starting the engine, my dashboard lights first glowed a dull orange before returning to normal. The radio, which typically turned on automatically, remained silent. Only the screen lit up without a station. Pressing the power button produced a soft popping sound before everything went dead again. As I backed up slowly, half expecting the engine to stall, I glanced upward. Another flash streaked overhead. This one dimmer but slower. Its movement was unnatural. Instead of curving or dispersing, the streak maintained a perfectly even thickness and brightness, looking artificially precise, like a geometric line. The compass needle jerked wildly, froze pointing straight up, then began spinning once more. I pressed harder on the gas, leaving them all behind. My headlights cut through the night, washing over weeds and cracked pavement in stark white beams that flattened everything. For a fleeting moment, the asphalt seemed to ripple like summer heat, but the cold night air quickly returned everything to normal. My phone buzzed, a half-readable notification about calibration flashed and vanished. The compass closed itself, the home screen appeared, and signal bars returned. Everything snapped back to routine. The humming stopped, the radio crackled with static, and dashboard lights brightened almost imperceptibly. I didn't slow down or look back. Route 6 carried me away, empty fields gradually transforming into houses, street lights, and familiar urban noise. Several minutes later, while passing a dark stretch of farmland, something caught my eye. A quick, reflective flash above the road, like metal or glass, drew my attention. A faint streak crossed the sky, moving slower this time, almost deliberately. My compass app opened independently, its needle pointing directly at the phenomenon. Then, everything went still. The streak faded, leaving stars that looked suspiciously ordinary, as if deliberately pretending nothing had happened. Months later, strange occurrences persist. My phone buzzes randomly in quiet places, parking lots, empty roads, wide fields. The compass needle twitches inexplicably, always following the same peculiar pattern. Southeast straight up, then back to normal. Around 3:20 a.m., Murphy, my dog, began growling at the ceiling. Not barking, he rarely does that, but emitting a low, steady growl reserved for unknown threats. Initially, I assumed he was dreaming, given his occasional sleep twitching, but when I sat up, he was fully alert, stiff-legged, intently staring at the room's upper corner near the closet. Darkness enveloped the room, softened only by the faint orange street lamp glow filtering through the curtains. Complete silence hung in the air. No furnace, no refrigerator hummed, nothing. Murphy's ears were rigid and his tail curled down tight. No sound from outside, just his low growl and my quickening heartbeat. I whispered his name, but he stayed focused, staring intently at something invisible. Then the light pulsed. Soft and muted, it glimmered through the curtains like a frosted bulb held briefly outside. It wasn't bright or directional, just a fleeting, colorless glow lasting maybe 2 heartbeats before vanishing. Murphy stopped growling but remained frozen, eyes locked on the window. I stepped out of bed, my foot brushing the creaky floorboard, yet even that sound felt oddly dampened. Pulling back the curtain, I saw nothing unusual. The street was empty, the street lamp steady, no cars passing, no porch lights on. Overhead, thin clouds glowed, faintly with distant light pollution. Nothing seemed bright enough to explain that strange pulse. Murphy whined behind me. When I turned, I noticed the hair along his spine was raised. The room felt pressurized, not cold or warm, just heavier. My breathing grew shallow. I checked the window latch locked tight. My fingers tingled against the metal frame, though that might have been nerves. I watched a minute longer, then let the curtain fall. The pressure dissipated. Everything seemed normal again. Murphy kept staring at the ceiling before pacing in circles and curling up next to me, still tense. I scratched his ears, trying to calm us both. Just as sleep started to claim me, a soft clicking emerged from the attic. Tiny, rhythmic taps, tap, 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 like something settling. But my attic is mostly insulation and beams. No reason for spontaneous movement. Murphy's head lifted, ears perked. The tapping stopped. I listened intently. Silence enveloped the house, yet my skin prickled with the sensation of not being alone. Murphy pressed closer. After several minutes of nothing, I eventually fell asleep, the lamp still burning. Everything felt like a dream until I went downstairs and saw the back door. Something was off. The deadbolt was locked, the handle too, but the security chain, the one I always latch before bed, unhooked and dangling straight down. I always notice that chain. It squeaks when I slide it. Murphy was strange all morning. He wouldn't leave my side, constantly staring upward like he was waiting for something. Outside in the yard, he kept sniffing the air instead of the grass. His curiosity felt different, more like anticipation of something unseen. I checked the security camera footage from the front porch and backyard. Nothing moved between midnight and sunrise. The last recording showed just a moth fluttering past the lens around 12:50. The Haarstart 12:50, the mare. Next night, I left the curtains slightly open. Around 2 a.m., I woke to an unnatural silence. No refrigerator hum, no heater, no distant traffic. Just pure, deep quiet that felt wrong. Murphy's head shot up, ears forward, staring at the window. No growl, just rigid attention. A faint glow swept across the curtains, slow, drifting from left to right. When I moved to get out of bed, it vanished instantly. The silence pressed against my ears. I pulled back the curtain. The street was empty, but the clouds overhead looked disturbed. A ripple, a thinning, like something had passed through and erased a piece of their texture. They parted smoothly before settling back. Murphy let out a low, soft whine and put his paw on my leg. Sleep was impossible that night. The next day, I checked the attic. Dreading what I might find, I discovered nothing. No animals, no disturbed insulation, no footprints, just emptiness. As I climbed down the ladder, something caught my eye on the floor beneath the hatch. A circular mark pressed into the hardwood, not quite a stain, but definitely there if you knew where to look. I placed my foot beside it for scale and realized the ring was wider than expected, too broad for furniture legs and too smooth to be from anything in my home. That night, Murphy was restless. He paced between the living room and hallway, stopping periodically to look up and sniff at seemingly nothing. Around midnight, I tried to sleep, but an unsettling feeling crept over me. Something felt like it was waiting just beyond my perception. Just as I was drifting off, Murphy barked sharply and bolted to the window. My heart racing, I followed and pulled back the curtain. Only the street lamp and quiet houses greeted me. No movement, no strange light. But the moment I stepped away, the room darkened almost imperceptibly, like a shadow had silently passed overhead. Murphy growled again. I didn't look back at the window. Whatever it was, didn't return that night. Or maybe it did, and I simply missed it. Now, whenever Murphy stares upward in the darkness, I tense up, anticipating that soft, impossible glow seeping through the curtains, barely visible, vanishing before I can reach the window, yet unmistakably real. For a brief moment, the house feels heavy, as if something unseen moves above. When morning came, I noticed my bedside lamp was positioned directly facing the window, not angled, but deliberately turned. I'm a deep sleeper, but I know I didn't move it. The cord stretched taut across the nightstand, pulled further than normal. Outside, a pale, milky light hovered near the treetops. Not bright enough to illuminate anything, not dim enough to ignore. It sat above the branches like a low, stalled cloud. The sky remained clear, stars scattered and untouched by this strange phenomenon. I lay there, puzzled, trying to comprehend how my lamp had been moved and what that ethereal glow might mean. My body knew something was wrong before my mind did. The quiet pressed in, heavier than usual. Even the old wall clock seemed muted. I swung my feet onto the floor, pushing aside the blanket. The wooden boards felt unnaturally cold for early fall. The pale glow outside flickered when I moved, as if suddenly aware of me. Murphy wasn't here. I'd left him with Aaron for the weekend. While deep cleaning the house, I missed his presence. My shadow stretched across the floor, strangely sharp against the faint light. At the window I pulled the curtain back just an inch. A weird light hovered across the treetops in a wide, shallow arc. Not from the ground, not from any house or car. No fire-like flicker, no drone-like vibration, just floating. A pale band sliding slowly along the spruce treetops. The street was dark. My porch light was off. I absolutely knew, this light was impossible for my neighborhood. Not white, not blue, more like the inside of a seashell held to sunlight, soft and flat simultaneously. When I pressed my forehead to the cold glass, the glow shifted upward, stretching taller and narrowing at the edges. I squinted, searching for a source. No mist, no reflection, no fog or dew. Nothing that could explain this. The glow drifted right, scanning the tree line methodically. Then I heard it, a soft, irregular clicking from inside the house. Close. Too close. The curtain swung as I turned. The sound came from my closet. Gentle tap-tap-tap noises, like someone lightly flicking the door from inside. Outside, the glow dimmed briefly, then brightened. I stepped backward until my calves hit the bed. The clicking stopped instantly, as if it had been waiting. The closet door was open an inch when I turned away from the window, a gap I hadn't heard for. My heart raced as I forced myself to walk closer, snapping on the light switch. Earlier, the pale glow outside had shifted strangely, brightening like someone was slowly turning up a dimmer, casting soft warp bars of light across the carpet. The light had moved smoothly above the treetops, about 20 feet high. Each time I tried to focus on a darker shape within the glow, it seemed to smear like a lens smudged with petroleum jelly. Wind stirred only the trees beneath this strange illumination, branches swaying while the air around my house remained perfectly still. When I'd first noticed it, the light paused, making my ears ring in sudden silence. Grabbing my phone from the nightstand took several attempts, my shaking hands betraying my fear. The screen blazed too brightly in the darkness, revealing my pale reflection. No notifications explained anything. Using the camera, I'd zoomed in. The light shimmered weakly, almost like heat rising from pavement. When I switched to the closet view, something rattled, just enough vibration to knock a jacket hanging inside. I heard a faint swish and nearly dropped the phone, telling myself it was the house settling, but I knew that was impossible. Houses don't settle in summer at 3 a.m., certainly not loudly enough to move objects. The light rose vertically as if gravity meant nothing, climbing higher until it slipped behind a cloud, becoming a muted halo. The cloud brightened from within momentarily before dimming. I waited, hoping it would return. My hand was ice cold where I touched the window. Now, standing before the open closet, I pushed the door wide, searching for any sign of what might have caused such strange events. I was staying at my cousin Matt's coastal cabin in Oregon for a long weekend, a trip I'd been meaning to take since he bought the place the year before. The cabin sat halfway up a bluff overlooking the ocean, Not fancy, just an old cedar-sided place with a deck facing the water. The beach below wasn't for swimming. Steep and rocky, it was dangerous in winter. But the view was unreal. That Friday night, Matt went to bed around 10 o'clock for an early fishing trip. While I wasn't tired, wrapped in a blanket, I sat out on the deck, listening to waves hitting the rocks with a slow, heavy rhythm. The sky was clear, with just a few low clouds hugging the horizon. The moon hid behind the bluff, making the ocean look almost black. Occasionally, the foam caught a faint glint from a distant porch light, but mostly it was darkness and sound. About 40 minutes into my night, I first noticed the light. It was far out. So far, when I finally returned inside and lay down, sleep wasn't an option. Every creak, every shifting shadow made my heart lurch. The room felt strange. Shoes, coats, and vacuum were in place. Nothing seemed disturbed. But near the bottom of the closet door where Murphy sometimes paused, a new mark caught my eye, a thin, pale streak shimmering faintly in the lamplight. It wasn't scratched or drawn, more like a residue, almost the same color as the glow outside. I touched it with one finger. It felt like dry, cool, powdery air, leaving nothing on my skin. I shut the closet door and backed away. The lamp, still pointed at the window, wobbled loosely when I adjusted it, as if a screw had been stripped, something it had never done before. The glow didn't return, but occasionally the room dimmed or brightened by the slightest fraction, like light passing far off. Just before dawn, I looked out again. The treetops were normal. The street lamp flickered faintly, the way it always did with a dying bulb. Birds began to move. Everything looked like any other morning, except the nightstand lamps, still warm, slightly crooked, felt like proof. Something had been in the room before I woke. Something that wanted the window lit. Something that wanted to see inside. The small bright point hovered just above the water, nothing like the silvery reflections from fishing boat deck lights I'd seen before. This light didn't reflect anything, and the water beneath remained pitch black. I leaned forward, squinting, noting how unnaturally still it was, hovering a few degrees above the horizon. Then it pulsed, not brighter, but fuller, like a gentle expansion and contraction. My mind raced to find rational explanations, a distant ship, a research vessel, maybe a boy with an unusually strong LED. But the more I watched, the less it resembled anything familiar from this coastline. Slowly, deliberately, the light began moving vertically. Unlike a flare that arcs and wobbles, this ascended in a smooth, straight line. 20 or 30 feet up, it stopped again. Below, the water showed no sign of its presence, no shimmer, no reflection, nothing to suggest anything extraordinary hung in the sky. Without thinking, I stood up. The air felt different, not cold or windy, just denser, as if the atmosphere had subtly thickened. Even the waves seemed muted. Another pulse, and the light rose a few feet higher. I cracked open the deck door, ready to wake Matt if needed, but something held me back from calling out. The situation felt too fragile, too undefined to break with sound. I was afraid speaking might shatter whatever delicate boundary existed between observing and acknowledging something truly strange. The light accelerated, rising into the thin cloud layer hanging on the horizon. For a brief moment, the cloud glowed from within, a soft, diffused light lasting barely 2 seconds. Then it vanished, swallowed completely. No trail, no spark, just gone. I waited, expecting it to emerge on the other side like a plane or helicopter might. Nothing appeared. The sky returned to its normal darkness, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. A shaky exhale escaped me. The ocean reasserted itself, loud and steady, reclaiming the silence the light had interrupted. I remained on the deck, scanning the horizon, searching for any hint of movement, my eyes restless and alert. The night was quiet, broken only by the sound of waves. I scanned the sliding door, catching glimpses of moonlight and reflections. Nothing solid appeared. After a few minutes, I decided to go inside, thinking I'd just spooked myself. But something was different before I closed the door. The waves near shore had subtly changed. Not dramatically, no sudden swell or irregular crash, but the pattern felt unnaturally uniform. The breaks came at almost identical intervals, like a precise metronome. Leaning out, I listened intently. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each wave sounded spaced exactly the same, as if the ocean had fallen into a mechanical rhythm. When I stepped back onto the deck, the air pressure shifted softly, like a faint pop in my ears. The waves continued their pattern. 5, 6, 7. Then the 8th wave hit slightly delayed, and suddenly the rhythm dissolved back into its usual uneven crashing. I waited motionless for anything else unusual. Nothing happened. The air felt lighter again. I went inside and gently shut the door. Sleep was elusive that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that bright dot rising silently into the clouds, leaving no trace. Around 5 a.m., I heard Matt in the kitchen and joined him, bleary-eyed. He joked about the cabin's ancient mattress and asked if I'd slept. I mumbled that I hadn't. Twice I almost told him what I'd witnessed, but the words felt fragile, as if speaking would somehow make the experience unreal. When Matt left for his fishing trip and sunlight spread across the landscape, I returned to the deck. The ocean looked normal, grey, blue, restless, indifferent. No unusual wave patterns, no ship lights, no signs of anything out of the ordinary, yet one inexplicable detail remained. On the deck's wet railing, a perfect dry circle about 3 inches wide glistened in the morning mist, as if something warm had rested there long enough to evaporate the moisture. I touched it. The wood felt the same temperature as everything surrounding it. By noon, when Matt returned, the circle had vanished into the day's dampness. I said nothing. I stayed one more night, but I couldn't relax on the deck again. Every glance toward the horizon felt weighted with unspoken mystery. When it happened, I was out behind my apartment complex, standing in the patchy grass by the dumpsters. It was around 11, cool for early September, with a moon bright enough that I didn't need a flashlight. I was trying to coax my neighbor Dave's cat, Murphy, down from the fence. Murphy was a skittish orange thing that had bolted from the stairwell when I opened the door, climbing the fence like he'd been training for it. I had just gotten Murphy's attention. He was making that weird chirping noise cats do at bugs when something changed. Not a dimming or brightening, but a subtle shift, like someone had quietly adjusted the color temperature of the night without asking permission. Looking up, I saw the moon was high and full, clean white against a clear sky. Then something slid across it. I didn't see where it started, only the moment it entered the moon's glow, a dark shape drifting slowly. No sound, no fluttering, no change in outline. Too smooth to be a bird, too big, too steady. It crossed from right to left, blocking a perfect crescent of the moon for maybe 2 seconds before slipping off the other side and vanishing into the darkness. Murphy hissed, a low, tiny sound like he wasn't sure he wanted to commit to being upset. My first thought was drone, but it hadn't moved like one. No blinking, no dipping or rising, no buzzing. It had been more like a shadow passing under a street lamp, except the street lamp was the moon, and the shadow had been huge. I stared at the empty patch of sky for a few seconds. Nothing. The moon looked normal again. The air felt normal. The only sound was a car turning into the parking lot behind the building. Murphy jumped off the fence and bolted toward the stairs. I followed, not running, but walking faster than usual. Inside my apartment, I went straight to the sliding balcony door and turned off the lights. Pulling the blinds apart, I found myself still checking, still wondering. Even now, when I drive home from work along the coastline, I catch myself looking at the sky above the ocean. Sometimes after sunset, I half expect that light to reappear, hovering in an impossible stillness, waiting just long enough to see if I'll react. But it never comes back. The moon hung bright in the clear sky as I stood watching, my fingers curled. Earlier, I dismissed the strange sight as a trick of the light or a high-flying goose. A few bats fluttered near the creek, and everything seemed normal. Back inside, I tried to distract myself with tea and Murphy's company, but the unease lingered. Around midnight, I stepped out again, drawn by an inexplicable urge to confront whatever had unsettled me. The air felt different now, cooler, carrying the creek's damp earthiness. At the parking lot's edge, beyond the streetlight's reach, I breathed slowly and listened. Distant highway sounds and cricket chirps were the only disturbances. Then, abruptly, the breeze vanished, not fading but stopping like someone had flipped a switch. Leaves froze mid-rustle, and an unnatural stillness descended. Something caught my eye in the sky. Stars to the moon's left dimmed briefly, as if something had passed between them. I stood motionless, waiting for another sign. Nothing came. Inside, I locked the balcony door, a habit I'd never had before, and spent a restless night repeatedly checking the ceiling. The next evening, Murphy and I followed our usual walking routine. Clouds moved quickly across a half-hidden moon. While untangling his toy from the leash, I felt it again, that subtle atmospheric shift. Not painful, just noticeable. Murphy froze instantly. His head snapped up, muscles rigid, tail puffing out so suddenly it startled me. Following his gaze, I saw thick, layered clouds sliding eastward, and something else, something that made my skin prickle with an unexplainable awareness. The night was quiet when something dark and uniform glided across the sky. Unlike clouds with their texture and edges, this was a smooth, flat shape that moved differently. It wasn't reflecting light, just pure darkness, similar to what I'd seen pass over the moon previously. But this time, it was much larger and closer to my building. Clouds quickly covered it, and then everything returned to normal. Murphy went wild when the wind picked up, and I rushed in inside. Shoes still on, I sat on the floor with him hiding under the coffee table, staring at the sliding door as if something might press against it. The time was 12:41 a.m., a number that inexplicably stuck in my mind. In the bedroom, I pulled back the curtains to find the sky looking ordinary, the moon peeking through clouds. Sleep was sparse that night. 2 evenings later, a gentle thump against the building's siding woke me. I checked the window. Everything seemed normal, but then a soft silver glow brushed across the wall, angled strangely and too high to be from the moon or a passing car. My heart raced as Murphy leaped onto the bed, trembling. The glow vanished instantly. Moving carefully to the window, I noticed the glass felt unusually cold. The parking lot below held just 3 cars, street lights steady, the sky calm. The next morning appeared perfectly ordinary. At the coffee shop, surrounded by sunlight, traffic, and people, I tried convincing myself nothing strange had happened. While drinking my coffee, a small passenger jet crossed the sky. For a split second, it disappeared behind something invisible. Not a cloud or a glare, but a transparent yet present shape distorting the blue sky. Then the plane reappeared, with no one else seeming to notice anything unusual. A buzzing sound followed me home that night, a strange companion on my usual route through the quiet streets of my Colorado town. I'm Lucas, and I've walked these neighborhoods my entire life. Maple to Edison, Edison to my apartment on Birch, past old cottonwoods and flickering street lights. It started after a long inventory shift at the hardware store. My head was already fuzzy from fluorescent lights and dust when I first noticed the sound. At first, I thought it was just the leftover ringing you get after being around loud equipment. But when I stopped to adjust my jacket zipper, the buzzing cut out completely. Not faded, stopped. The air was cold and still. Traffic was light, with just a few cars rolling down the street and a distant dog barking twice. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. When I started walking again, the hum returned, matching my pace exactly. It wasn't loud or sharp, more like a faint electrical buzz that seemed to hover just above me. Following at an angle, I tried slowing down to see if the sound would change. It didn't. The hum remained steady and soft, but undeniably present. Halfway down Maple, I turned and looked behind me. The sidewalk was empty. A single car passed, its engine whining softly before disappearing around the bend. I glanced up, half expecting to see a transformer causing the noise, but the overhead wires were just wires, dark against the evening sky, with no sparks or flickering. Now, weeks later, things feel normal again. Murphy seems like himself. I haven't seen any shadows crossing the moon or shapes slipping between clouds. But I still check. Every night, almost unconsciously, I step onto the balcony and look up. I wait, watching for something to drift across the moonlight. Nothing ever does. Yet sometimes, just before I turn away, the light around the moon shifts for a moment, just a moment, and then it's gone. The buzzing followed me, not because I wasn't freaked out, but because stopping made the silence feel heavier. By the time I reached Edison Street, the sound had shifted slightly. It now pulsed softly, like a distant engine breathing in slow, even rhythms. One rise, one fall, repeat. A street lamp caught my path, and for a moment the buzz dipped in pitch, as if whatever created it shrank from the light. I paused under the lamp. Silence. When I stepped out of its circle, the buzzing returned instantly. My heart raced. To appear calmer than I felt, I shoved my hands deep into my jacket pockets. No one was around, but the gesture helped. A sense of porch light flicked on as I passed by, and simultaneously, the buzzing stuttered for half a second before continuing. That light had always been sensitive, triggered by dogs and raccoons, but I'd never witnessed a sound react to it before. Something about this made the situation feel more intentional. I crossed the street, hoping to create distance from the houses, but the buzzing pursued without hesitation. Bird Street stretched darker, with fewer street lights and wider spaces. Most residents kept their curtains drawn at night. My apartment building waited at the street's end, a squat two-story structure with peeling paint and mismatched mailboxes. As I approached, the buzzing grew fainter but persistent. Now it seemed to originate from a distinct point above me, no longer diffused. I kept looking up, expecting to see a drone or helicopter, something with blinking lights or visible movement. Nothing appeared. The sky remained clear, stars sharp, and a thin curved moon hanging silently. When I reached my building, I hesitated at the stairs. The sound continued, softer now, as if drifting back or upward. With each step, the buzzing dimmed further. The moment I reached the landing and stepped under the covered walkway outside my apartment door, it stopped completely. I stood listening. Silence, only my neighbor's refrigerator hummed quietly through the wall. I went inside, locked the door, and sat on the couch in darkness, waiting, though for what, I couldn't say. An unfamiliar sound and vibration caught my attention, with headlights briefly illuminating the blinds, but nothing seemed out of place. Sleep eluded me that night, coming in short, restless bursts. Each time I shifted, I strained to hear the mysterious buzzing. When morning arrived, everything felt normal again. Walking to work, I heard no strange sounds overhead and sensed no unusual pulsing in the air. I rationalized the previous night's experience as something mundane, perhaps electrical noise from a transformer or a malfunctioning security device. Even if the timing seemed odd, I wanted to believe it was just a random occurrence. 2 nights later, the buzzing returned with unsettling precision. It began halfway down Edison Street before I had even crossed Birch. The familiar pitch and faint pressure hovered just above me. When I froze, the sound immediately stopped. Taking a tentative step forward, the hum resumed. My pulse raced. Turning slowly, I watched my shadow shift under the street lamp. For a brief moment it appeared stretched, as if the light wasn't hitting me quite right, though I couldn't be certain. Looking up revealed only a blank sky. I quickened my pace home, constantly aware of the buzzing, maintaining a consistent distance overhead. Back at my apartment, I settled by the window, watching the sky above the parking lot. For nearly an hour, everything seemed ordinary, trees rustling, occasional headlights passing by. Then, at exactly 11:52 I time seared into my memory from double-checking the clock. The buzzing started again, this time while I sat completely motionless. The sound was different now. Positioned about 20 or 30 feet above the parking lot, it drifted slowly from left to right, pulsing with a soft, rhythmic rise and fall. Instinctively, I crouched low to avoid casting a silhouette in the window. The buzzing moved smoothly across the lot, pausing momentarily before lifting upward with an inexplicable grace. No visible object accompanied the sound, just an invisible presence moving through the air. As quickly as it began, the buzzing faded into silence. Sleep would not come until dawn. One evening, walking home through a light drizzle, everything changed again. The air seemed to thicken around me, and a faint buzzing began. So subtle I almost mistook it for rain on power lines. But the sound pulsed with an eerie familiarity. I stopped walking and the buzzing stopped. When I moved again, it resumed. An unsettling feeling crept into my chest, not quite panic, but a sense of being intensely watched. Something was tracking my movements with precise, deliberate attention. As I approached Birch Street near my building, the sound shifted slightly ahead and to the right, as if whatever was creating it was anticipating my path. I slowed down, and the buzz slowed. I sped up, and it matched my pace perfectly. When I reached the stairs, the buzzing didn't immediately vanish. Instead, it lingered overhead, steady and patient, like it was making a decision. Then silence. I went inside, locked the door, and sat on the floor. Nothing else happened that night. For over a month now, the buzzing hasn't followed me. I rationalize it as electrical interference or some mundane atmospheric phenomenon. Something boring, something normal. But on quiet nights when the street goes still, I catch myself listening. And on rare evenings when the wind dies completely, I swear I can feel the air grow heavy for a second. Something matching my pace, waiting to be noticed. My smartwatch had already vibrated twice before I reached the end of the street. At first I dismissed it as a glitch, maybe a forgotten notification or faulty haptics after getting wet during a run. When I checked my wrist, the screen was blank. No messages, no reminders, just the time glowing innocuously. I shook my wrist and continued walking. The vibration paused briefly, then buzzed again. 2 short, precise taps that mimicked an incoming text. I sighed and muttered to myself. The night was cool and dry, early fall settling in around me. I was heading home after helping Andrea move a bookshelf and rearrange her living room, an exhausting task that left me craving nothing more than leftover pasta and mindless TV. My neighborhood was quiet, with large maple trees and uneven sidewalks, houses nestled behind low hedges and fences. Only a few porch lights broke the darkness. My watch buzzed again, harder and longer than before. Like an urgent alarm, I stopped under a corner street light and swiped the screen. Nothing. I held down the button to check for system errors, but still nothing. The device seemed perfectly normal, yet desperately trying to communicate something. That was the first moment I felt uneasy. The second came moments later when I noticed a tiny speck of light above the street. It wasn't bright, not like a plane or drone or satellite, just a faint point. No larger than a star, but hanging unusually low. My initial thought was a radio tower tip, but there were no towers in that part of town, and this light was motionless, suspended perfectly above the intersection ahead. Twice more my watch vibrated. I glanced between the device and the light, an unsettling connection forming, not logical, but that visceral sense that something was fundamentally wrong. My heart began to race uncomfortably. I took slow steps forward. The light remained absolutely still, no flickering, no movement, no reaction. Then 3 sharp buzzes from my watch. An unfamiliar pattern. I turned slowly, scanning the street for any explanation. Headlights, security lights, electrical transformers, nothing unusual. Just an empty street and that persistent, unmoving point of light. Quiet street, spaced lamps throwing soft shadows, no movement except leaves rustling overhead. My watch kept buzzing, its pulses changing short, long, hesitant, like someone's indecisive finger tapping on a desk. At the 4-way intersection, a tiny light hung suspended, maybe 100 feet up, maybe less. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate anything below. The pavement looked completely ordinary. Smooth patches, cracked sections, a faded crosswalk symbol, but the light seemed impossibly close. Closer than any star should be. Suddenly, the watch vibrated so hard I nearly dropped it. When I checked, the screen was pure white. No icons, no numbers, just uniform blankness. I tapped, swiped, held the button. Nothing happened. The light above me began to dim, not abruptly but slowly, like someone gently turning down a dimmer switch. I stepped back, expecting it to vanish or drop lower. Instead, it just hovered, barely visible, then gradually brightened again. I'd been holding my breath. Forcing myself to look away, I scanned the intersection. No cars, no people, not even a stray cat or passing cyclist. Just a quiet residential street and that strange, dim point of light hanging overhead. One long, continuous vibration from my watch. I lifted it toward my face and the buzzing stopped instantly. The screen returned to normal, displaying 9:14 p.m. as if nothing unusual had occurred. Walking steadily, I kept the light in my peripheral vision. It followed, drifting with an unsettling smoothness that made me question whether I was really seeing movement. Each step carried me forward, the light maintaining its position just above me. Rounding the corner onto my street, I realized the light had repositioned itself, not quite down, not quite sideways, but always aligned with my path. So subtle was its movement that I almost doubted my own perception. My watch buzzed, a single, sharp sound. Quickening my pace, I walked faster down the block. The light began to move, rising steadily upward, not rapidly, but with a consistent climb. It grew dimmer as it ascended, eventually blending so completely with the stars that I couldn't distinguish its presence. By the time I reached my driveway, it had vanished. The watch remained silent for the rest of the night. Inside, I placed it on the coffee table, watching and waiting as if it might suddenly reveal something. It didn't. Functioning normally, I restarted it twice, finding no glitches or unexpected notifications. Lying in bed later, I obsessively replayed the walk, searching for rational explanations. A silent drone with a weak light, a satellite at an odd angle, some atmospheric anomaly, an electrical issue causing the buzz. These theories should have provided comfort, but they didn't, because sometimes when I'm mid-journey heading to work, the grocery store, or Andrea's house, the watch will give a single, unprompted buzz. And instinctively, I always look to the sky. The radio died between Wizian and Napoleon. One moment a late-night call-in show from Toledo discussed gas prices, the next complete silence. No static, no gradual fade, just an unnatural emptiness different from normal interstation quiet. The display showed the station number and volume unchanged. I nudged the knob. Nothing. Great, I muttered. More to break the silence. It was nearly midnight. A late July night in northern Ohio, the kind of humid evening where the air feels dense even with windows up and AC running low. I was on County Road 13, taking the back route to my parents' place after leaving Nate's house late, hoping to avoid highway patrol. Outside my headlights, endless corn and soybeans, occasional dark barn silhouettes. No towns, no gas stations, no other vehicles. The last pair of headlights had passed me 10 minutes earlier, traveling in the opposite direction. I tapped the radio off and on. Still nothing. The tone started soft, barely audible, like a tiny tuning fork hidden inside the speakers. Not high, not low, just a thin, clean note pulsing rhythmically on, off, off. The FM 97.3 display remained frozen, and twisting the knob did nothing. The volume and pattern stayed unchanged, unaffected by my attempts to adjust. A strange sensation crept up my neck. I rationalized it as a quirk from the used car's stereo, maybe a loose wire or a faulty capacitor. But something felt off. The tone's tempo matched my heartbeat with eerie precision. I counted silently, fingers pressed to my wrist. 1 pulse, 2, 3. Sometimes perfectly aligned, sometimes drifting, but close enough to be unsettling. Turning the radio off made no difference. The tone persisted. Suddenly, the display went black, and the dashboard dimmed for a split second before returning to normal. Everything looked fine. Check engine light off, RPM steady, temperature unchanged. Only the dark radio screen and that rhythmic tone remained. I cracked the window, hoping to determine if the sound was just in my head. Warm, damp air rushed in, carrying the smell of manure and cut grass. Distant cricket sounds drifted through, no tone, but when I rolled the window back up, the sound returned, clear as before. On, off, gripping the steering wheel, I focused on the road. Tall cornfields loomed on both sides, blocking any view beyond. Occasionally, a dirt lane would break the rows, my headlights briefly illuminating a mailbox or metal gate before the fields closed in again. Minutes passed with just the engine's hum and that unnatural beeping. Then something changed. The tone doubled in speed. Pulses came closer together. My chest tightened as if someone had turned a dial inside my head. At that exact moment, the field suddenly opened up. The road stretched out before me, cutting through a vast soy field where the land sloped gently away. From my vantage point, I could see clear across the expanse to the distant tree line, where old power lines etched sharp black lines against the horizon. Suddenly, a dull red light caught my eye. At first, it was just a smudge above the soybeans, like a faint cigarette ember in the darkness. As I drew closer, the light transformed. It wasn't a perfect circle or a pinpoint star, but more like the blurred glow of an LED seen through frosted glass. Suspended maybe 20 or 30 feet above the ground, it hung motionless, no blinking, no beam, just a steady muted red that seemed to exist in its own isolated space. My speed began to drop unconsciously. From 55 to 40, then 35 miles per hour, something felt off. The car seemed too fast, yet my attention was completely consumed by this strange light. A rhythmic tone in the speakers shifted, growing slightly lower in pitch. I reached for my phone in the cup holder, but something was wrong. The screen remained black despite my efforts. No glow, no icons. The power button did nothing. "Come on," I muttered. The red light grew larger in my windshield, unchanging in color and intensity. Dirt lanes branched off on both sides, completely empty and dark. No signs of life, no farmhouses, no yard lights. As I drew nearly parallel with the light, I noticed something deeply unsettling. There were no reflections. The soybeans beneath it remained dark shapes in my headlight's wash, untouched by the red glow. It was as if the light existed in its own separate reality, interacting with nothing around it. My instinct screamed a warning, but my body moved sluggishly. Caught between impulses to slow down or speed up, I settled on a creeping pace of about 20 miles an hour. My eyes were now fixed on the side window. The red light remained perfectly still, hovering about 50 yards out over the field. The tone in the speakers grew more intense, not louder, but more present, like it was pressing directly against the inside of my ears. On, off, on, on. The engine hummed softly as I coasted down the empty road, my breathing suddenly loud in the confined space. A flat red glow hung suspended over the shadowy field, perfectly still for one brief moment. Then, without warning, it shot upward. No gradual climb, just an instantaneous vertical leap, like someone had abruptly edited reality. A thin, bright red streak rocketed skyward, impossibly fast and unnaturally straight, vanishing into low clouds. The clouds glowed faintly from within where the streak disappeared. A soft circular light spreading, then shrinking back to normal grey. Silence crashed into the car, cutting through the previous tone mid-pulse. My ears rang with the sudden absence of sound. I realized my foot had lifted off the gas and the car was coasting. Reflexively, I checked the rearview mirror, expecting some trace of the red streak. Nothing remained, just empty road and dark fields. I pressed the accelerator, watching the speedometer climb. 30, 40, 50. Cornstalks rose again on my right as the landscape shifted. For miles, I avoided looking at the sky, fear or caution holding me back. Eventually, curiosity won. Through the windshield, the clouds looked completely ordinary. No strange shapes, no glowing holes. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I snatched it up, nearly dropping it. The screen illuminated normally, all icons in place. Delayed notifications flooded in, group chat messages, emails, a weather alert about possible midnight fog. I opened the compass app without thinking. The arrow spun twice, then settled. North was north again. The radio crackled to life at normal volume. A call-in host droning about city council drama, as if nothing unusual had occurred. I spun the dial. Every station was exactly where it should be, with standard static between them. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, everything seemed perfectly mundane. The porch light glowed, the house looking precisely as I remembered. I pulled into the familiar driveway of my childhood home late at night. 20 years had changed nothing outside. The ceramic rooster still perched lopsided on the front step, and the maple tree continued its slight lean over the garage. The sky looked just like always. Inside, my dad dozed in his recliner, a late-night news show humming softly. When he asked about my drive, I responded, "Yeah, fine," the words feeling rehearsed and automatic. Only when I was alone in the guest room did I start noticing something odd. My phone showed 12:07 a.m., but my car's dashboard clock had read 11:58 when I arrived. I'd always been meticulous about checking my car's time during long drives. Maybe the clock had just drifted. Maybe I'd misread it. I lay in the darkness, listening to a distant train and watching headlight shadows drift across the curtains. Weeks later, driving home on a different stretch of county road at dusk, something subtle happened. The radio flickered briefly, just long enough for a soft, familiar tone to slip between songs, so faint I could almost convince myself I'd imagined it. Then everything returned to normal, with the sky above the empty fields unchanged. The warm rock appeared about 2 hours into my hike in northern New Mexico's Sangre de Cristo Mountains. I'd started from the ski basin trailhead around noon, planning to reach a favorite overlook before darkness fell. The day had begun clear, bright sun, cold air, that uniquely thin, high-altitude wind. A few cars were parked at the trailhead, but soon I was completely alone. As I climbed higher, the temperature dropped. Patches of old snow clung to the trail's shaded edges, and my breath emerged in white clouds. Thin clouds obscured the sun, making the cold more intense. My exposed fingers stung inside their gloves. I remember thinking I should have worn a thicker hat. While flexing my hands and blowing warmth into them, my boots suddenly hit a patch of rock that felt distinctly wrong. I was hiking a trail at 10,000 feet, surrounded by pines and frost, when something strange caught my attention. A chunk of granite, about 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, sat wedged into the path, and it was warm, not burning hot, but as if it had been basking in summer sunlight. I double-checked, stepping back and then forward again. The rock definitely felt warm, which made no sense given the icy landscape around me. The ground nearby was crusted with thin ice, with little glassy patches of frozen melted snow scattered about. I squatted down and pressed my gloved hand against the rock. Even through the fabric I could feel its unusual heat. Pulling off my glove, I touched the stone directly. Definitely warm, not steaming or glowing, just wrong. A cold feeling slid down my spine. I tried to rationalize it, maybe some unique mineral property or underground water creating warmth. But I'm no geologist, and the surrounding air remained cold. As I stood up, my knees aching from crouching, I noticed something else peculiar. The sky above this trail section looked distorted. A subtle shimmer hung in the air, like heat rising from summer asphalt, causing the blue to bend slightly. No jets, no contrails. Nothing that could explain this phenomenon. I moved around, testing the distortion. Left, right, forward. The shimmer stayed fixed over that same patch of trail. Then the wind died down. Suddenly, an unnatural silence descended. No birds, no distant road noise, no other hikers, only my breathing and the rush of blood in my ears. Stepping back onto the warm rock, I felt the air around my legs warm a degree or two. The hair on my arms lifted as if static electricity was building. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the eerie stillness. I pulled out my phone, no notification, no call. The screen showed the time at 2:08 p.m. and the battery icon flickered strangely, dropping from 68% to 52%, then slowly crawling back up to 64%. The GPS icon flashed once and vanished, even with airplane mode on. When I backed off the rock, the air felt normal cold. The static sensation disappeared. My phone screen stabilized at 63% like nothing unusual had happened. I let out a short, nervous laugh and tried to convince myself I was imagining things, high altitude, low blood sugar, whatever. I took a drink of water, ate half a granola bar, and decided to continue hiking. Standing there staring at the rock wasn't going to solve anything. As I walked away, I glanced back several times. The rock looked completely ordinary. The sky above still had a slight ripple, but branches soon blocked my view, and I lost sight of it. About 10 minutes later, something felt different. I couldn't immediately place what was wrong. I kept walking, expecting to encounter the switchback that usually marked my halfway point, but it never came. I knew this trail's variations well, and the turns and rises weren't matching my memory. I stopped and pulled out my phone to check the downloaded trail map. The location arrow began spinning in a slow circle, then suddenly snapped to a spot 50 yards off the trail, as if I were walking through the woods. I rotated in place, watching it twitch. It wouldn't settle. Briefly turning off airplane mode, I hoped GPS might behave better. No signal bars appeared, but the arrow jumped again, this time a quarter-mile ahead, near a junction I definitely hadn't reached. The map stuttered and froze. The timestamp read 2:48 p.m. I checked my watch. 2:31 p.m. holding them side by side. My watch ticked to 2:32, while the phone remained at 2:48, then suddenly updated all at once to 2:32, like it was correcting itself. That tight feeling returned to my chest. I stuffed the phone away, told myself I was just being jumpy, and continued walking. To stay grounded, I started reading the trail marker numbers aloud. The wind picked up again. The wind moved in short, unpredictable gusts, barely stirring the pine branches. Sometimes it would push hard enough to make the trees sway, then suddenly stop, leaving the branches creaking in a way that felt out of sync with the stillness. When I reached the overlook, everything looked normal. The valley stretched out below, with a distant highway and a few scattered houses. The sun was dropping toward a bank of clouds, casting everything in a pale gold light. For a few minutes, I felt silly for getting worked up earlier. I took some pictures, finished my granola bar, and decided to head back down before the light changed. As I descended, I couldn't stop thinking about the rock. I checked my watch, timing my pace out of habit. The return trip usually took about 35 minutes. At 27 minutes, I started looking for familiar landmarks, the crooked pine with its lightning scar, the boulder that looked like a face. They appeared in the expected order, everything seeming perfectly normal, but when I reached the spot where I remembered the warm rock, something was different. The pine trees had thinned, revealing a patch of exposed stone across the path. This wasn't just a single rock anymore. It was a massive slab, maybe 10 feet long and 4 feet wide, slightly raised from the surrounding ground. A clean line of frost edged its surface. I slowed down and reached out my hand. Warm. Not hot, but warmer than my skin. The same, consistent heat as before, just spread over a larger area. When I stepped onto the stone, everything changed. The world seemed to dull. Wind sounds faded as if someone had turned down the volume. My breathing sounded distant, almost detached. The trees at the edge of my vision appeared to bend inward slightly, like looking through a wide-angle lens. Looking up through the branch gap, I saw the distortion in the sky had grown. It wasn't just a shimmer anymore, but a vertical column, like a river of slightly bent air rising from the rock. Clouds behind it warped as they passed, stretching thin before snapping back to their original shape. There was no color change, no unusual light, just that wavering vertical strip. Standing on the rock, I felt a faint vibration through my boots, subtle as a distant truck idling underground. It wasn't strong enough to disturb even a speck of dust, just a barely perceptible tremor. I was standing at the edge, lost in a moment where time felt slippery. My phone buzzed with a quick triple vibration. When I pulled it out, the screen was black. Pressing the side button, I waited. Then it lit up battery at 19%, which was strange because it had been in the 60s earlier. My watch showed 3:03, while the phone displayed 4:11 p.m. My throat went dry. The instant my foot left the stone and touched dirt, the vibration disappeared. Wind roared back, making me flinch. I looked up. The column of distortion remained, but thinner now, as if something had slightly pulled back. My eyes locked on the shimmer as I backed away quickly. It didn't move toward me or do anything dramatic. It just hung there, rippling gently, like heat rising from rock in a place far too cold for such an effect. As I rounded the next bend and trees blocked my view, my heart was pounding hard. I almost ran the rest of the way down. Intermittent waves of warmth brushed against my legs, like walking through a sunbeam in a mostly shaded forest. Each time I'd instinctively check the sky. About 10 minutes after leaving the rock, the trees opened up. I could see the ridgeline where the stone slab was. Even from a distance, the sky over that mountain section had a faint vertical wobble. Not a cloud, not smoke, just a patch of air that looked fundamentally wrong. I focused on the trail, forcing myself to keep moving. The light changed rapidly, shifting from gold to the flat gray that precedes dusk. Temperatures dropped again. My fingers went numb inside my gloves. The last half mile to the trailhead felt impossibly long. When the parking lot finally appeared through the trees, a weak sense of relief washed over me. Only 2 cars remained, mine and an old blue Tacoma. No one was visible, but a faint scratching sound came from the truck's bed, like something shifting in a plastic bin. I didn't investigate. Shoving my pack into my car's back seat, I sat for a moment. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds, no voices, even the wind seemed to have vanished. When I started the car, the radio came on automatically mid-song. The radio's volume suddenly cut out as my fingers touched the knob. The display went blank for a moment, then flickered back to life with a full volume bar and no station info, as if it had reset itself. A thin, almost imperceptible tone hummed through the speakers, present yet not quite there, like a sound my ears might be inventing. I switched the radio off completely. The hum vanished. The dashboard clock read 4:38 p.m. My watch disagreed, showing 3:29. Glancing between the two, I noticed my phone had died in the last 10 minutes. Black screen, unresponsive to my pressing the button. That was enough. I left the parking lot and drove down the mountain, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Gradually, the normal world began to reappear. A couple in hiking gear walked along the road's shoulder, their dog trotting ahead. A truck rounded a bend coming from the opposite direction, headlights cutting through the landscape. A crow swooped low across my windshield. When cell service returned, my car's clock had synced with my rebooted phone. Both now showed a little after 5 p.m. My watch remained stubbornly stuck before 4. That night, I didn't bother syncing the times. The watch sat on the counter, wrong until its battery died, weeks later. I've returned to that trail since, but only during summer, and always with companions. We've never located that exact warm rock section again. Bare stone exists in several places that might be the spot, yet it's always cold to the touch, even in August. Still, during water breaks, I find myself gazing through branch gaps, searching the sky for that slight, impossible shimmer that bends the air, where the mountain should simply be a mountain. The power failed around 10:30 p.m. while I worked on my laptop. The screen went black, and the house plunged into a heavy silence. No refrigerator hummed, no heater cycling on, just darkness and quiet. Initially, I assumed a tripped breaker, but the entire block was out. Street lamps dark, no porch lights, no illumination from neighboring windows. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight, noting its low 14% battery from my forgotten charging. Habitually, I flipped the light switch a few times. Nothing. For a while, I sat in the living room, uncertain whether to wait or investigate outside. The air in the house felt heavy, charged in a way that reminded me of the moments before a thunderstorm, except no storm was forecast. I cracked a window, and cool air rushed in, unexpectedly sharp for early June. A faint vibration caught my attention. It was subtle, like standing near a generator or an idling truck, but no vehicles were around. The air itself seemed to hum, not audibly, but powerful enough that my skin could sense it. Stepping outside, the vibration intensified. The pressure felt slightly off, making my ears want to pop without actually changing. The street lay dark, houses reduced to hollow silhouettes. A few neighbors stood on distant porches, talking in hushed tones, their shapes barely visible. I walked down to the sidewalk, rubbing my arms against the unexpected chill. My light t-shirt wasn't enough for this strange summer night. That's when I saw it, a pale light drifting across the sky from west to east. Too slow for a meteor, too smooth and silent to be anything familiar. The light moved like a boat gliding across still water. Not quite spherical, not quite oval. It resisted clear definition. Every time I tried to focus, its edges blurred, as if deliberately avoiding precise observation. Baxter, my neighbor's usually vocal dog, sat motionless at the yard's edge, staring upward with an uncharacteristic stillness. When the light passed directly overhead, the air's vibration pulsed stronger. I reached for my phone to capture the moment, but it was unresponsive. The screen lit up, then froze, its clock numbers unnaturally bright. No button press made any difference. Looking up again, the light had slowed to an almost hover, not perfectly stationary, but close. Something was definitely not normal. In one place, something made tiny, barely noticeable adjustments. A slide here, a movement there, so subtle you'd miss them if you blinked. The vibration intensified. The air grew heavy. My arm hairs stood on end. I stepped back, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. The street had gone eerily silent. Even people on their porches had stopped talking. No one called out or pointed. We were all waiting, watching. A strange breeze moved through the neighborhood. It wasn't like normal wind, more like the air was being pulled and released. With an intentional push, a few leaves lifted off the ground, swirling upward in an unnatural spiral. They rose higher than physics should allow, then drifted back down as if something lost interest. The overhead light flickered subtly, like someone gently adjusting a dimmer switch. A deep vibration sank into my bones, not painful, just undeniably present. "Do you see that?" Mrs. Carter's voice came from behind me. She stood in her robe and slippers, eyes locked on the sky. I nodded, never looking away. "It's been doing this for minutes," she whispered, as if speaking loudly might disrupt something. More neighbors emerged, First one, then another. The street slowly filled with silent, motionless figures staring upward. The light began moving, drifting eastward with increasing speed. Initially slow, then smoother, more controlled. Someone muttered, "Satellite maybe," but this was no ordinary satellite. Its movement defied explanation. Changing speed, making the air vibrate through your very ribs. No dramatic streaking, no trailing light, just smooth, deliberate acceleration. At the neighborhood's edge, it brightened sharply, not blinding, but casting faint shadows on nearby houses. Then, abruptly, it vanished. Not behind clouds, not below the horizon, just gone. The pressure disappeared instantly. My ears popped. A dog barked. A car alarm chirped, as if something had briefly touched it. The cold air settled quickly as the sun dropped. A typical late October evening near the Red River Gorge in Kentucky. I was camping solo on a less traveled trail, my small tent tucked into a narrow clearing surrounded by trees. This was different from previous trips with friends. Just me, a log to sit on, and a fire crackling softly in the quiet woods. My dinner was simple, a bag of freeze-dried pasta and some instant coffee. The branches overhead creaked occasionally, shifting as the temperature dropped. The woods seemed to adjust, settling into the night's chill with subtle sounds. As I poked at the fire, trying to coax the last flames onto a stubborn piece of wood, the ground trembled. It was a single, soft jolt. Not violent enough to be scary, but definitely noticeable. Just a quick shake, almost polite, like something large had stepped nearby. My log vibrated beneath me, and the mug beside me rattled slightly. Even the fire seemed to respond, wavering as if something underneath had moved. I sat motionless, listening. No aftershock followed, no continuing rumble, just that one gentle tremor, then silence. Later that night, back in my tent, something felt different. A brief vibration, a momentary hum like a half-remembered memory. When I glanced out, the sky appeared empty, but the air felt charged, as if something had traced the outline of the neighborhood and hadn't completely departed. Days later, back home, strange details lingered. My phone had jumped ahead 9 minutes during a brief power outage. Street lights flickered back to life one by one. Neighbors looked confused, some returning inside, others staring at the sky expectantly. The battery on my phone flickered between 13% and 6% before stabilizing. The house returned to its normal warmth and quiet, but that sense of something undefined remained, waiting, watching, just beyond perception. The woods went dead quiet after I noticed some rock climbers, old quarries, and distant construction. It wasn't just quieter, everything completely stopped. No bugs, no rustling, no nightbirds, just total silence. The air felt heavy. Even the fire seemed muffled somehow. Without thinking, I held my breath and stood up, scanning the tree line. Everything looked normal, just dark silhouettes against the sky. Maybe 10 seconds passed before something strange happened above the clouds. This wasn't like any lightning I'd seen camping before. It was a slow glow, as if someone was gradually turning up a dimmer switch behind a lampshade. The clouds brightened with a weird, dull, metallic color. Not white, not blue, not quite silver, just an industrial-looking glow that pulsed once, deep and slow, filling the entire sky, almost like a breath. Then it faded back into darkness. I stood frozen, waiting for another flash or some sound. Nothing came, no distant plane, no wind. The woods remained absolutely silent, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then suddenly, after about 30 seconds, the bugs started again. All at once, like someone flipped a switch. The woods felt normal. The fire crackled. My shoulders relaxed, but the back of my neck stayed tight. I tried to continue camping normally. I added wood to the fire and boiled water for tea, but my ears remained hyper-alert. Every tiny sound made me look up. I kept checking the clouds through the trees, wanting to text Kyle, but realizing I had no cell signal. Around 10:30, I crawled into my tent. Not really tired, just wanting to be inside something with walls. I zipped the entrance and lay on my sleeping bag, listening. At first, everything seemed normal: crickets, distant owls, settling leaves. Then the silence returned, exactly like before. One moment the forest was alive, the next completely muted. The absence of sound felt heavier than sound itself. I sat up slowly. My heart was pounding, thundering in my ears, as silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. Nothing moved. No tremor, no glow, just an unsettling stillness that made me feel watched. Carefully, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside into the freezing air. Through the tree gap, dark clouds blended with an even darker sky. I swept my flashlight beam slowly across the landscape, checking the tree line. The light caught only trunks and leaves, revealing no movement, no shine, no reflected eyes. Then, a faint breeze whispered across the treetops, stirring leaves at my feet. Suddenly, forest sounds erupted, like walking into a room mid-conversation. I remained outside, listening and watching the sky. My nerves stayed coiled tight, even though nothing else happened. Sleep that night came in short, fragmented bursts, with me jerking awake whenever the woods went too quiet. The next morning, while packing, I noticed something strange. A very fine, pale dust covered the ground, on leaves, logs, everywhere. It wasn't ash or pollen, but almost like metallic powder. Ground so fine it looked like dust. It brushed off my boots in smooth streaks. Oddly, nothing looked damaged. Trees unmarked, ground unscorched. The dust seemed to have drifted down overnight. I left earlier than planned. During the hike back, the forest sounds felt artificially normal, overcompensating for the previous night's unnatural silence. Weeks passed before I mentioned the glowing sky to Kyle, who joked about satellites and weather balloons. I agreed aloud, finding it easier than explaining the wrongness of that silence, or how the light had pulsed like something living behind the clouds. Since then, I've returned to Red River Gorge, but I never camp alone anymore. Now I stick to popular sites where you can always hear someone else nearby, breathing, moving in their tent. The woods are beautiful, but I don't trust their quiet anymore. The Colorado night was crystal clear, stars scattered like tiny pinpricks across the darkness. I was out back of the duplex in Ridge Park, late and cold, waiting for my dog Hazel to finish her nightly routine. She always sniffs the same patch of grass, and I wasn't paying much attention until something caught my eye. Up in the sky, there was a weird blur. Not a normal kind of blur. This was different. Everything else around it was sharp and defined. The stars, the roof line, the mountain silhouettes. But this spot, about the size of my fist held at arm's length, looked smudged, like someone had smeared a lens right in the middle of the sky. I blinked hard and rubbed my eyes, expecting it to change. It didn't. Then it started moving. Slow. So slow that at first I wasn't sure it was moving at all, but after a few seconds its drift became clear. It wasn't like a cloud. There were no clouds that night. The air was freezing and completely transparent. Hazel wasn't her usual self. She growled, a low, uncertain sound. My dog doesn't typically growl at the sky. Raccoons, neighbors' cats, sure, but empty air. Never. She backed up toward the door, clearly unsettled. My brain tried to make sense of it. Wind distortion, an invisible, tiny cloud. But nothing explained its behavior. The blur maintained its fuzzy oval shape, drifting steadily. When it reached a thin strip of cloud near the horizon, something strange happened. It disappeared behind the cloud, suggesting actual depth, like it was genuinely above the cloud layer. I waited for it to reappear. It didn't. Hazel was done, scratching at the back door. I let her in, stepping inside and immediately locking the door with a speed that surprised me. Something about that blur had gotten under my skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just my imagination. Trying to sleep seemed impossible. The dark room with open blinds felt suddenly uncomfortable. I closed them, but the memory of that unexplained sky blur kept nagging at me. I lay there with my phone on my chest, scrolling mindlessly through nothing as the hours crept past midnight. A soft popping sound caught my attention, like the static of a radio about to tune in, but this wasn't coming from inside the house. It seemed to be outside, maybe down the street. Hazel, curled at the foot of the bed, lifted her head. Her ears went straight up, alert. Another pop, slightly louder this time, then silence. I got up and peered through the blinds. The street was deserted. The sodium lamp cast an orange glow, and the neighbor's pickup sat in its usual spot. No movement, no people. Just as I was about to close the blinds, something caught my eye. A faint distortion near the street's far end. Not a person, not an animal, but a shimmer in the air like heat rising from asphalt, except it was below freezing. This horizontal heat ripple moved across the road, the air behind it warping like looking through imperfect glass. As it passed the street lamp, the light flickered, not a normal flicker, but a smooth dimming, as if someone were slowly turning down a dimmer switch. The distortion continued its steady path until it faded into the darkness near the cul-de-sac. Sleep was impossible after that. The next morning, I went outside early, wanting to reassure myself of normalcy. The sky was clear blue, without a hint of blur. Hazel trotted around the yard, seemingly unbothered, but something drew my attention to the fence. 5 boards near the far side bore a powdery residue, as if someone had dragged chalk across the wood. When I touched it, the boards felt unnaturally cold, too cold for sunlight, colder than the surrounding fence. My fingers tingled numbly after brushing the surface. I tried to convince myself it was frost, though it didn't look like any frost I'd seen before. That evening, I drove to the grocery store, partly for necessities, but mostly to avoid sitting alone in the house. The store was bright and noisy, comfortingly normal. I wandered aisles I didn't need, prolonging my time among other people. On the drive home, just after turning onto Ridge Park Road, the radio cut out for half a second. Not off, not static, just a brief, strange silence before returning to normal. I was driving down the road when something strange caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A shimmering patch of distorted air hovered about 20 feet above the ground, drifting alongside the tree line. It moved with purpose, keeping pace with my car for a few seconds before veering off into the trees. My stomach sank. I pulled over, turning to look behind me. The shimmering patch slid between branches, rising higher and higher until it vanished into the sky. Gone. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a light trick, but I knew that wasn't true. The radio cutting out earlier didn't feel like a coincidence. Back home, I kept the living room dim. Hazel nestled close to me. Every few minutes, I'd scan the window, half expecting to see that blurry patch floating outside. Hours passed with nothing happening. Just after midnight, Hazel suddenly stood and walked to the back door. She wasn't whining or scratching, just staring, her tail rigid. I joined her but didn't open the door. Through the glass, everything looked silent. The yard seemed empty, but the air felt suspended, like the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Then a star above the yard flickered, not a gentle twinkle, but a sharp, candle-like flicker. Once, twice. The star dimmed, as if something had moved in front of it. I remained completely still, barely breathing. Slowly, a tiny dark patch in the sky shifted left with smooth, steady motion. It passed between 2 brighter stars and then faded, blending back into the night as if it had never existed. Hazel backed away from the door. I locked it, knowing full well that a lock meant nothing to something that could drift through the sky so effortlessly. Sleep didn't come that night. When dawn arrived, the world looked normal. Cars starting, neighbors walking dogs, distant traffic humming. But something felt fundamentally different. Now, I find myself checking the sky every night, like someone testing a bruise. Most nights, there's nothing. But occasionally, that feeling returns. The old coastal path near Sanmere Point wound around the cliffs, a route locals claim to love but rarely walked. Late afternoon hung heavy grey clouds, threatening rain without ever following through. We were mid-conversation about a weird customer when everything changed. The wind vanished completely. Not gradually, but instantly, like someone had flipped an invisible switch. My hair fell flat against my neck, and the silence struck me first. Naomi stopped, squinting upward. "That feels weird," she said. Overhead, clouds continued sliding west, thick and layered, but the air around us remained absolutely still. Grass stopped bending. The salt smell hung suspended. No breeze moved anything. Naomi laughed nervously, storms playing games, and we kept walking. Something felt off. The distant waves sounded muffled, as if someone had thrown a heavy blanket over the shoreline. Our footsteps on the gravel path rang unnaturally loud. Conversation became forced, with Naomi's voice echoing strangely, despite no surfaces to bounce sound. Halfway down the path, the air grew warm, not humid, but wrong, like standing too close to someone else's breath. "Do you feel that?" I asked. She nodded, rubbing her arms. I hate this place sometimes. Near the trail's narrowing point, fog rolled in rapidly, not from the water, but along the cliff faces. Thick, pale mist curled over rock ledges like downward slipping smoke. Yet even this fog didn't disturb the motionless air. Naomi slowed. "Let's turn around. This is creeping me out." Then everything went completely silent. Not just the ocean or wind, no birds, no distant traffic, no waves. Just a hollow silence like being trapped inside a sealed box. Near the tree line, something seemed to dim overhead, as if someone had smudged the sky. For a moment, I thought I saw something drifting just behind that smudge, hidden within the sky itself. We stood frozen, our shoulders pressed together, staring upward. The sky overhead had a strange, wide oval where the clouds thinned out, its edges suspiciously smooth. Something was different. A pale, muted brightness began growing through the break. Not quite sunlight or moonlight. It didn't cast shadows, just made the sky look thinner. Then came the humming. At first it was barely audible, like a distant power line vibration, though no towers were nearby. It resonated softly through my chest, just present enough to notice. Naomi's breath caught. "Do you hear that?" I nodded, unable to speak. The light above pulsed gently, like a slow inhale. My phone buzzed, but the screen was blank. No signal, no clock, nothing. "That doesn't make sense," I muttered. She stepped closer, her eyes wide and mouth slightly open. "We should go," she whispered, but neither of us moved. The humming deepened. Not louder, but heavier, as if pressing down on everything around us. My ears felt full, reminiscent of altitude sickness. While clouds beyond the oval continued drifting normally, those forming the strange shape remained perfectly still, like frozen cotton stretched over an invisible framework. Then something darker moved behind the light. Not a definable shape, but a deeper shadow gliding beneath the thin luminescence. Something massive was passing overhead. Naomi whispered, "What is that?" I had no answer. It moved deliberately, almost gracefully. As it passed, the air pressure shifted. I felt it in my jaw and sinuses, similar to standing near a large truck, but without sound or wind. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The humming stopped. Absolute silence descended. A sharp vibration rippled through the ground. Subtle but definite. Gravel shifted beneath our shoes. Almost instinctively, I glanced down. The tall grass beside us stood perfectly upright, as if pinned in place, not swaying at all. When I looked up again, the pale light had dimmed slightly. The dark, shapeless mass stretched long and slow across the sky. Naomi's hand gripped my arm, her nails digging through my sleeve. We remained there, witnessing something inexplicable. We half-jogged back down the path, not looking up again, our boots crunching too loudly against the gravel, as if trying to reinforce reality. Naomi gasped, "What the hell was that?" My voice shook as I replied, "I don't know." By the time we reached the parking area, the air felt normal again, cold, coastal and damp. Clouds rolled overhead like any other ugly pre-storm sky. Cars passed on the nearby road. A gull cried somewhere beyond the cliffs. Everything normal. Too normal. Naomi stood by her car, rubbing her face like she could wipe the moment away. "You felt that, right?" "The air just stopping." "Yeah." "And the sound?" "Yeah." She let out a dry laugh that didn't match her eyes. "Good. At least I'm not losing it alone." We didn't hang around. Just awkward goodbyes, quick glances back at the sky, and then we drove separate ways. The whole ride home, I kept checking my mirrors and windows, expecting that strange stillness to return, but the breeze kept brushing the roadside trees. Everything moved like it was supposed to. When I got home, my phone suddenly reconnected like nothing ever happened. Messages rolled in from earlier. Missed notifications, normal life piling back up. But later that night, as I stood at my kitchen window, I noticed the clouds drifting slow across the moon again, and for just a second, right where the sky had thinned above the cliff path, one small patch moved differently, too smooth, too deliberate. The air inside my house stayed perfectly still. Earlier, the humming had returned softer, almost gentle, and the light began to thin, pulling inward toward the center of that oval space. The shadow shifted, rotated, and then faded, not moving away, just dissolving until the cloud cover thickened again. The wind snapped back on, sudden and sharp, grass bent. Fog scattered. Waves grew louder all at once. We both gasped, like underwater swimmers breaking the surface. Condensation formed a perfect ring on my windshield while sitting in the grocery store parking lot, engine off, windows cracked just enough to let the late summer air drift in. It was still warm out, no sudden chill, no foggy breath, just this smooth, clear circle of moisture, like someone had pressed a cold metal hoop against the glass. I pulled over in the far corner of the lot to take a call from my cousin Mateo. My name was Darren Kovac. The sun was low, casting everything in a dull orange light that made the asphalt look soft and dusty. A few cars came and went, but something caught my eye, a ring on my windshield. It didn't look natural, not streaked or patchy, just a perfect circle. I rubbed it with my sleeve, and it didn't smear. Instead, it faded, and then crept back, as if the glass itself remembered its shape. Out of habit, I checked the dashboard temperature, 78 degrees normal, just like when I'd parked. Mateo was still talking about his new job and a forklift accident at work. I half listened, my eyes fixed on the windshield, watching the ring slowly sharpen again. No mist anywhere else. Just this circle, centered slightly off my usual driving line of sight. "You okay?" Mateo asked. "Yeah, just distracted," I replied. "Weird windshield thing." He laughed, but my stomach had that quiet tightness that signals something's off. A pale blue Prius rolled past, its side windows reflecting sunlight cleanly. No fog, no rings, just normal glass. Suddenly, my phone crackled. Mateo's voice cut out. The screen flashed, call failed. Looking up, I saw the windshield ring had deepened. Tiny lines branched inward like frost patterns, but without any cold. The car's interior remained warm and dry. I rolled down the window, letting outside heat rush in. Nothing changed. The ring stayed put. I started the engine and pulled out, heading toward Route 6. As I moved, the ring moved with the glass, staying perfectly centered, almost like it wanted to be right in front of me. No other cars showed anything similar. At the stoplight, I leaned closer to study it. A slight shimmer like about to evaporate condensation, but it never did. The rest of the windshield remained crystal clear. Green light. I drove on. It felt silly to be unsettled by what could be fog, but this wasn't fog. It looked deliberate, measured, intentional. As I left town, houses gave way to low fields and distant tree lines. The sky shifted color. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange, fading to soft gray. Clouds rolled in gently from the west, not threatening, but heavy enough to dull the horizon. A ring pulsed almost imperceptibly, a subtle darkening and lightening that made me blink, certain my eyes were playing tricks. Miles down the highway, my phone buzzed with a text from Mateo. "Call me back." I tapped the screen, but the signal bars dropped to 0. No service. This stretch of road always had coverage which didn't make sense. Cresting a slight hill, I glanced ahead expecting something unusual. The road stretched empty, quiet, with fields on either side. A faint patch of condensation formed near the far edge of the windshield, not a full circle, but a soft arc like an incomplete ring. A low, distant hum drifted into the car. It wasn't coming from the engine or the road. Instead, it felt like pressure vibrating faintly through the steering wheel. My mirrors showed nothing, no cars, no trucks, just open road and fading light. The original ring thickened, becoming clearer. It wasn't quite round, but too precise, too smooth. My breathing grew shallow without effort. The hum grew slightly stronger, not loud, just present. I pulled onto the narrow gravel shoulder, tires crunching softly. The car idled. The hum remained unchanged. The ring sat calm, as if waiting. Stepping out, the evening air hit me, warm and still. No breeze, no insects, just quiet. Standing beside the car, I expected the condensation to change, but it looked the same from the outside. A perfect faint halo on the glass. No fog anywhere else. I walked around the front, scanning the windshield from different angles. Sunlight barely kissed the horizon, throwing long shadows across the field. Something odd caught my eye. The ring didn't reflect the sky like the rest of the glass. Through that circle, the sky looked slightly darker, as if filtering light instead of reflecting it. The hum deepened, subtle and slow, like a low note from something massive moving far away. I searched the field ahead for any source. Nothing moved. No power lines, no towers. Condensation around the ring began to shift, adding to the growing mystery. A soft vibration rippled beneath my boots as I stood there, frozen. No birds, no wind. I had stepped back from the windshield, suddenly uncomfortable being so close to it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Still no signal. The time read 7:12 p.m. When I glanced back up, I noticed the ring had shifted. Not dramatically, but enough to know it was no longer centered where it had been. It seemed to have slid slightly upward, as if following my line of sight. My skin prickled. The hum grew fainter, thinning like sound drifting away. Then something caught my attention. A faint glow just above the horizon, far out past the fields, soft, pale, almost like a reflection of the dying sun, except the sun was behind me now. The glow didn't flicker or break into pieces. It just hovered low, steady and quiet. The ring responded. It tightened, edges sharpening, condensation drawing itself into a clearer outline. The veins receded, leaving only the circle again, more defined than before. I watched the distant glow hold perfectly still while the sky slowly dimmed around it. I forced myself back into the driver's seat and shut the door. The inside of the car felt heavier now, like the air had thickened. I stared through the ring at the glow on the horizon. The two lined up unnervingly well, as if the ring framed it. Several seconds passed, maybe longer. My sense of time felt slow and stretched. Then the glow shifted sideways, smooth and silent. The ring followed, not sliding across the glass like liquid, but reforming in that new position as though it had always been meant to sit there. The hum returned, softer but steady. I gripped the steering wheel and swallowed hard, pulsed loud in my ears. Fear didn't rush me all at once. It crept in heavy and slow, filling the space behind my ribs. The glow drifted farther left. The ring adjusted again. I finally started the car and pulled back onto the road, heart fluttering. As I drove, the glow kept the same distance, never getting closer or farther, just pacing me along the horizon. The ring remained steady in front of my eyes like a sighting target I couldn't escape. Mile after mile passed and swallowed silence. No radio, no service, just the road and that quiet light. After what felt like forever, the journey continued unchanging and eerie. The train crawled late into the evening, that kind of delay where everyone obsessively checked their watches, hoping somehow to speed time along. Midnight had just passed. I sat by the window with my backpack between my feet, watching my tired reflection blur against the dark glass as suburbs gave way to open land. The car's interior carried a faint scent of old upholstery and hot metal. Intermittent crackles from the intercom mumbled about upcoming stops. A guy a few rows ahead snored with his head tipped back, while a woman across the aisle continuously scrolled her phone despite having no signal for miles. Out of habit, I glanced outside, expecting the usual streaks of orange and white from distant houses or passing roads. Instead, something unusual caught my eye. A line of lights low on the horizon, perfectly straight as if drawn precisely with a ruler. They didn't move or scatter or blink. Each light was small and pale, almost the exact color of a distant street lamp. Something about their alignment made my stomach tighten. The train kept rattling forward, trees whipping past the tracks, but those lights remained fixed, unmoving, not getting closer, not drifting, just sitting perfectly level and still. I pressed closer to the glass, trying to determine if it might be a highway or some long stretch of infrastructure. Later, driving home, the strange encounter lingered. The windshield stayed clear, but occasionally, when sunlight hit just right, I could almost see a faint circular outline, as if the glass surface remembered something it wasn't supposed to hold. My phone signal returned normally, with a missed call from Mateo and standard notifications. The hum from earlier had faded, replaced only by distant crickets and the soft rush of tires on asphalt. The train rolled through isolated land, a stretch so quiet it seemed to swallow sound. Outside the window, darkness pressed against the glass, punctuated by faint tree outlines under a cloudy sky. I was already feeling foggy from the long day when something caught my eye. A line of lights stretched low on the horizon, unnaturally straight and pale. They didn't move, didn't shift, just hung perfectly suspended against the empty ground. No glow reflected below them, no sign of a road or source. I glanced around the train car. Everyone looked bored and drained, seemingly unaware of anything unusual. As the train curved, the line of lights remained exactly where it was, not budging an inch, even though we had clearly moved. Something felt deeply wrong about them. They didn't belong to the land or sky. They just existed, independent and strange. Slowly, the angle changed, and the lights slipped out of view, disappearing behind the window frame. My reflection replaced the view, tired face, faint interior lights. I tried to let it go, convincing myself it was just some distant industrial sight or weird reflection. A soft vibration passed through the car, stronger than the usual train rumble. Bags jostled overhead. When I looked again, the landscape was pure black. No lights, just emptiness. 10, maybe 15 minutes later, I felt that unsettling sensation of being watched, though I knew no one was behind me. The snoring passenger hadn't moved. The woman remained fixated on her phone. Everyone else looked half asleep. Then the lights returned. Exact same formation, same spacing, now slightly closer. Still no ground illumination, still perfectly positioned. The train continued onward, carrying its drowsy passengers through the night. The train moved steadily, and outside the window, a strange line of lights caught my attention. They didn't react to anything. No flickering, no movement. Just hanging there, perfectly still. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, straining to understand what I was seeing. No road, no reflection, just this impossible straight line cutting through the darkness. My pulse quickened. I tried to look away, but something pulled my gaze back. For a brief moment, one section of the line softened and dimmed before brightening again. The rest remained unchanged. A voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a stop I barely recognized. As the train slowed, the brakes hissed. Those lights remained frozen, even as we rolled to an almost complete stop. I watched, mesmerized. They didn't drift or respond. When we picked up speed again, the lights slowly slipped sideways out of view as the track curved, vanishing without ever shifting position. A heavy, nervous energy settled into me, the kind that makes swallowing difficult. I tried scrolling on my phone, but nothing loaded. My mind kept returning to that line, how fundamentally wrong it felt. Minutes later, we entered a shallow tunnel. The windows reflected only interior lights and quiet passenger faces. Emerging on the other side, the landscape opened into a vast, flat expanse. The line of lights was back, now farther out, but even longer, stretching across a huge portion of the horizon, straight, unmoving. My chest tightened. I sat motionless, watching. Something felt deliberate, as if the lights were aware of the train moving through darkness, aware of this specific stretch. A faint hum drifted in from a window crack, or deeper within the car, that didn't match the train's usual mechanical rhythm. The line remained constant, but the surrounding darkness felt subtly different. Its tone somehow altered. I checked my phone. Just after 1:30 a.m. I tried to track how long I'd been watching, but time felt slippery, refusing to settle into any consistent pattern. The night air was heavy as I stood on the train platform, looking out toward the dark horizon. One last time. Nothing was there now, just scattered lights and low clouds. But the image of that perfectly straight line remained fixed in my mind, as if it had never been part of the landscape, only waiting somewhere beyond the normal view. Just moments earlier, the train had pulled into the station with its familiar screech and shudder. A few passengers disembarked while a cool breeze slipped through the open doors. I stayed seated, uneasy but unable to explain why. As the journey continued, the ride passed without further incident, drifting through familiar neighborhoods with faint streetlights spreading in messy human patterns. When the train first approached the town's outskirts, small scattered lights had appeared near the tracks, gradually drowning out the distant horizon. The straight line had faded into the general clutter of nighttime illumination before vanishing completely. I remember staring at the spot where it had been, a moment suspended in quiet observation. Later that evening, I was sitting on the back steps of my cousin Trevor's coastal cabin in Port Ninsley. It was just past 10, and the sky was a dull purple bleeding into black. Low clouds drifted in from the water, and the ocean breeze barely cut through the sticky late summer warmth. My name is Leah Monroe, and I'd driven out to stay a few nights alone while Trevor was away for work. A soft mechanical hum suddenly filled the night for several seconds. When it stopped, the silence felt unnaturally deep. The sound wasn't loud, but clear and steady, almost clean, like something running smoothly on its own terms. I leaned forward, trying to identify its source. The small gravel drive beside the cabin was empty, with just my dusty Subaru and some old kayaks stacked against the shed. The trees stood motionless. No breeze, no rustling. Distant waves rolled gently. Trevor always said the place was quiet and peaceful, but this hum didn't feel peaceful at all. The silence hung heavy around me, so thick you could almost touch it. I was seated on the beach, my heart racing as I waited for something, anything to break the stillness. The ocean sounded distant, its volume mysteriously dampened. Barefoot, I stood and stepped onto the sand, letting its coolness anchor me. The clouds drifted lazily overhead, their movement strangely muted. Night air pressed against my shoulders with an unusual weight. Near the shore's edge, a soft glow caught my eye. Not bright, just a faint haze that resembled moonlight, except no moon was visible. I watched as the glow slid smoothly along the waterline and then vanished. "Okay," I muttered. More to hear a human sound than anything else. Walking closer to the water, wet sand squishing beneath my feet, I kept glancing back at the cabin. Its porch light remained steady and normal, a plain yellow bulb over a screen door. A low hum returned, vibrating through my chest more than my ears. It felt like a truck passing, but nothing was moving. My shoulders tensed as I slowly turned in a complete circle. Nothing. The hum disappeared, leaving behind a silence so complete that even insects seemed to have stopped breathing. Something wasn't right. Thin reflections began sliding across the water's surface, as if an unseen presence was moving just beneath. No splash, no ripples, just a subtle shift in light. I backed away, watching these strange reflections pass closer to shore before fading beneath the surface. The water looked calm, but an intense feeling of being watched overwhelmed me. The empty beach suddenly felt anything but empty. Heading back to the steps, I kept my eyes locked on the shoreline. The sand felt colder, the air heavier. Midway, the hum returned, longer, steadier, now seemingly above me. Looking up, I saw the clouds glowing softly in one spot, a milky patch amid the darkness. Stable and unmoving, the glow hung there, quiet and distinctly wrong. My heart thundered in my ears as I stood frozen. Then, with precise control, the glow shifted slightly eastward, the hum moving in perfect synchronization. The silence hit hard after everything stopped. My ears felt underwater as the glow dimmed and the clouds returned to normal. The hum vanished along with the strange light, leaving an eerie stillness that seemed to stretch forever. Climbing the porch steps, I moved faster, seeking shelter. The wooden boards creaked beneath my weight, a sound that now felt unexpectedly comforting. Inside the cabin, cooler air carried hints of salt and pine cleaner. I locked the sliding door, my hands trembling more than I wanted to acknowledge. The hum returned, softer and seemingly distant. Pressing my forehead against the glass, I strained to see through my own reflection into the night. Outside, everything appeared unchanged. Sand lay flat, trees stood motionless, the shoreline glimmering faintly. A soft light band slid across the water, moving slower and more deliberately. It arced slightly, then straightened as if correcting its path. No splash, no sound. My body tensed, every nerve on high alert. The light drifted farther out and stopped, hovering a few feet above the water's surface. The hum diminished to barely a whisper, more like a subtle pressure shift. Barely breathing, I waited. The water remained perfectly still beneath that faint glow. After what seemed an eternity, the light folded into darkness and vanished. The hum disappeared with it. I continued staring, half expecting it to return or intensify. Nothing happened. Gradually, normal ocean sounds resumed. Gentle waves, a distant gull's cry, a soft breeze. The night felt lighter, but still not quite right. I spent the evening inside, keeping the lights low and trying to distract myself with the old TV. Trevor stayed close to the couch. Occasionally I thought I detected a faint floor vibration, though that might have been my jangled nerves. Before bed, I checked the window one last time. The shoreline looked completely ordinary. Dark water, pale sand, quiet trees. As I turned away, the glass caught a fleeting shimmer, like an afterimage of light passing by. When I looked back, nothing remained. I was camping alone at Lake Arbordale, a wooded site a half-hour outside of Harrier's Point. The sky had been clear earlier, but low clouds rolled in around dusk, smudging the stars and making the trees look taller. My name's Colin Dreyer, and I'd done solo trips plenty of times. I knew the normal sounds of the woods. This wasn't normal. The forest went quiet so fast it felt like someone had muted it. Mid-sentence, while complaining about a cheap tent zipper snagging, I noticed the sudden silence. 1 second there were crickets, beetles clicking against leaves, the low steady buzz that always filled the night air. The next, nothing, not a single chirp. I stopped moving and just listened. Silence. Not peaceful silence, heavy silence. I stepped out from the tent, boots sinking into soft dirt. The lake shimmered faintly to my left, reflecting a weak sliver of moonlight that kept disappearing behind clouds. Everything felt too still, like the air itself had paused. Seriously, I muttered, scanning the tree line. No movement. Leaves hung limp. Even the wind had died down. Then I saw it. A dim light hovered just above the tree line on the far side of the clearing. Not bright, not sharp, just a soft, pale glow sitting there, barely illuminating anything around it. It didn't cast beams. It didn't flicker. It looked like someone had drawn a faint circle of light and left it suspended in the air. I stared, unsure if I should blink. It wasn't rising. It wasn't falling. Just there. My stomach tightened in a slow, creeping way. "Okay," I whispered. Nope, the silence around me felt wrong. Like everything that usually lived out here had decided to hold its breath. The only sound I could hear was my own shallow breathing. The glow shifted slightly, just a few inches, drifting sideways like it was following a path I couldn't see. The trees beneath it didn't brighten. The ground didn't reflect it. It existed without touching anything. I took one step back, then another. The dim light slid a little higher and then slowly dipped, as if nothing there. The cabin stayed silent after that, but the air never fully felt the same. Like the night had pressed its hand against the world for a moment and pulled away, leaving behind an invisible mark that refused to fade. The forest had gone quiet suddenly. Where insects once chirped and rustled, now there was an unnatural stillness. A light had been hovering near the treetops, then simply vanished without warning, no flickering, no trace left behind. When the forest sounds slowly resumed, they felt forced, like an unconvincing attempt to restore normalcy. I couldn't move at first. My gaze remained fixed on the spot where the light had been, searching for some explanation hidden in the darkness. Eventually, I started shoving my gear into my bag with sharp, agitated movements. The zipper cut through the silence as I slung the pack over my shoulder, trying hard not to look around. The path back seemed to stretch longer with each step. Every small sound made my muscles tense. A branch cracking, leaves rustling. Halfway down the trail, something strange happened again. The night sounds didn't disappear completely but became muted, as if a thick layer dampened the forest's usual noise. The air felt heavy, almost pressurized. Another glow appeared, smaller and lower this time. It briefly touched the forest floor before lifting and dissolving into darkness. My heart raced. I was torn between moving forward and standing completely still, unsure which would be safer. Eventually, I just waited frozen, but nothing more occurred. By the time I reached the parking area, my hands were shaking despite the mild night. Relief washed over me as I tossed my pack in the trunk and slid into the driver's seat. I sat breathing deeply, listening to the car's quiet, cooling sounds. The headlights carved a comforting path through the trees. One last glance toward the tree line confirmed everything looked normal. Just dark forest. The drive home felt endless, with my eyes darting to every roadside reflection. Nothing followed me. Nothing appeared above the trees. Pulling into my driveway, the familiar porch light and sight of my house finally settled my jangled nerves. The night stretched out, quiet and familiar, but something felt off. My tea grew cold on the counter as I stared out the kitchen window. The trees at the yard's edge moved gently in a soft breeze, looking completely normal. Everything seemed exactly as it always had. I'd been on edge since that moment in the woods earlier, when an unexplained silence had cut through the usual forest sounds. When I finally made it home, I locked the door and tried to settle down. The house settled around me, the refrigerator humming, the ceiling fans spinning, my phone glowing softly as it charged. I checked the time. 11:42 p.m. Only an hour had passed, though it felt like much longer. Sleep eluded me. Around 2 in the morning, with the night still dark and heavy, it happened again. Just for a second, the world outside went completely still. Then a faint, pale light brushed across the tops of the distant trees, so brief it might have been a trick of my tired eyes. But I knew it wasn't. The night remained untouched as a faint echo from the lake drifted momentarily and then vanished.